Committee to order. I'd like to welcome everyone to today's meeting. As you know, we have a very busy schedule ahead of us today as part of a very busy week. We'll be marking up our fiscal year 2026 bill covering Homeland Security. Homeland Security markup was originally noticed for June 12th, but delays in our other markups necessitated a move to today. Tomorrow, our Military Construction and Veterans Affairs bill will be considered on the floor. And on Thursday, we'll have we'll be marking up our legislative branch bill for fiscal year 2026. As such, we must and will finish our work on the Homeland Security bill today, or more probably tonight, and we'll be here until we're done. That said, we will recess in the afternoon for votes, then reconvene immediately following the final vote. As soon as I get 32, we will come to order. I also understand there's a full member briefing on the situation in the Middle East scheduled for 3:15 this afternoon. We will recess for that briefing. We'll go up to as close to 3:15 as we can and give you time to get there, and we will reconvene immediately after. I'll be going to the brief myself, so I'm coming straight back here. As soon as we get 32, we'll be moving. So I appreciate your cooperation. Our only order of business today is the Homeland Security Appropriations Bill for fiscal year 2026. So I'll now recognize Chairman Amodei to present the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Ranking Member, of the full committee. I've been around this process for a little while, and I know that the bill's been out and that you're all familiar with it. A robust amendment discussion has taken place and proposed on both sides. And so I am going to assume for the bill presentation that you all know why we're here and what's in the bill, and I yield back. Thank you very much.
That must be your opening move to be chairman of the full committee. That's a brilliant start. I'd now like to recognize Ms. Underwood for remarks on the bill.
Good morning, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, while I ultimately cannot support the legislation we're considering today, I've been so pleased to work with you in strengthening and improving our many shared bipartisan priorities in the space. I thank you and your staff for your hard work and partnership and look forward to continuing to work together. I also want to thank our staff, who I know have not slept much recently, Shannon, Jamie, and Chris, for their incredible work on these critical issues. Now, I think we can all agree that whether it's at the border, the airport, our country's shorelines, or in cyberspace, the Department of Homeland Security cannot fail. But I also believe that the department cannot fail the rights and values that make America the greatest nation in the world. Under the Trump administration, DHS is out of control, illegally spending hundreds of millions of our taxpayer dollars, flagrantly violating constitutional rights, and putting America's security at risk. Under this administration, due process and the limitations that the Constitution puts on our government are being ignored, and this bill must do more to check them. Right now, this bill fails to protect American citizens from being deported by the Trump administration. It fails to protect American citizens from being confronted in their homes and offices or having their property seized, as this administration's deportation policies ignore the boundaries of federal law. It shamefully allows law enforcement to continue snatching people off the street, at church, at schools, without requiring proper identification or due process. And it punishes immigrants who are following our laws, all while rewarding for-profit detention centers with billions of taxpayer dollars and lax oversight. As members of Congress, we have a constitutional responsibility to keep this administration accountable in both how it spends taxpayer dollars and how it operates. We saw this year, after our FEMA hearing, what this department does when anyone speaks truth to power. I'm deeply concerned that if this bill passes and DHS goes unchecked, the United States of America will become a country that our own citizens will seek refuge from because of the repeated attacks on our basic freedoms and rights. Giving unchecked power to this administration is bad enough, but unfortunately, the bill makes things worse by leaving Americans more vulnerable to catastrophic threats and burdening state and local governments. The bill adopts DOJ staffing cuts to CISA and FEMA personnel by roughly $130 million and $93 million, respectively. Let me say that again. As a ceasefire remains elusive with Iran, a nation known for cyber attacks on adversaries, infrastructure, and communities, you are doubling down on cuts to our core cyber defenses. That's indefensible. And the only people who benefit from this bill's failure to invest here are bad actors in Iran, China, Russia, and around the world who are now find it easier to attack the American people. Meanwhile, the White House requested $0 to supplement FEMA's disaster relief fund that all Americans rely on to recover from major disasters and fails to acknowledge an urgent $8 billion deficit in the disaster relief fund. We are heading into both wildfire and hurricane seasons, and friends, the funding level provided in this bill is insufficient to help us dig out of this hole, and it all but guarantees that the disaster relief fund will be at a dangerously low level again by next summer. All of this means that the burden to respond to the next ransomware attack on your local hospital or deadly hurricane in your district will increasingly fall to state and local leaders who lack the resources to respond. State and local communities don't have the ability to rebuild after disasters or cyber catastrophes on their own. This bill abandons our neighbors after a crisis. Finally, I want to note that this bill does not include funding for the Citizenship and Integration Program that has now been run for more than a decade by U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. This initiative funds faith-based organizations and community-focused organizations that help legal immigrants prepare to become citizens by preparing them for the citizenship exam and helping them learn English. Mr. Chairman, we make America stronger and more secure when we make investments in our communities stronger and when we uphold our values. But this bill does neither, and I cannot support it. I yield back.
Thank the gentlelady. I now recognize myself for remarks on the bill. With our agricultural priorities advanced, we now turn to our Homeland Security bill to ensure a comprehensive approach to protecting Americans. To start, I want to thank Chairman Amadei and Ranking Member Underwood for their attention and their hard work. Everyone in this room understands that the safety of our citizens is paramount. We do this through strong vigilance, action, empowering our frontline law enforcement agents. The work of the Department of Homeland Security is fundamental to those efforts. Their mission is more vital than ever. Under new White House leadership, we've seen a critical shift toward restoring safety and security, including an historic turnaround at our southern border. Yet we continue to face the consequences of the dangerous threats emboldened by the previous administration's weakness. The alarming rise of anti-Semitic assassinations, rioters attacking federal agents, and extremist risks shows the evolving threat environment at our doorstep. It's why we are advancing critical resources to ensure DHS has the tools to protect the homeland, enforce the law, strengthen border security, and enhance preparedness for everything from violent threats to natural disasters. This bill delivers just that and upholds the America First agenda through supporting first the Border Patrol and enforcement agents, detention and deportation efforts, cutting-edge technology to detect illicit activity, and Coast Guard investments to counter Communist China's aggression in the maritime sphere. From our communities to cybersecurity, we're implementing the most effective safeguards at every level and supporting our brave agents on the front line. I want to thank the staff on the subcommittee, both the majority and the minority, for their hard work on the product before us. As our last markup, actually that's not correct. This is not our last markup of the week. We clearly have changed the speech since I saw it. I do look forward to consideration and approval of this vital message, and with that, I yield back my time. I now recognize my very good friend, the ranking member of the full committee, Ms. DeLaurel, for her opening remarks.
I thank the chairman, and I thank the ranking member and the chair of the full committee and the subcommittee staff on both sides of the aisle for their hard work, especially Shannon McCulley, Jamie Wise, and Chris Papp. I'm opposed to this Homeland Security bill because it will make Americans less safe, more vulnerable to growing security threats. Despite the ever-increasing threats against American families, businesses, critical infrastructure, and national institutions, House Republicans' bill weakens our national security. It leaves Americans vulnerable to attacks from our adversaries by sharply cutting cyber and infrastructure security. Their bill fails to protect Americans from terrorism and violent extremism by eliminating targeted violence and terrorism prevention grants, which help local leaders and law enforcement identify threats and intervene before violence occurs. The House Republicans' bill allows President Trump to abuse Americans' constitutional rights by shuttering civil rights offenses, blindly funding costly private-run detention centers with limited oversight, green-lighting the deportations of people who have lived and worked here for 10 to 20 years, abandoning due process protections, and defunding the community organizations that help these communities manage response to border issues. And they do nothing to help with the cost of living. The cost of living crisis is felt by every American family. But the president is not laser-focused on the cost of living crisis. He is making it worse by stealing resources that help families and businesses recover from disasters. Among the illegally frozen funding is over $100 billion FEMA awards state and local governments to respond to disasters and mitigate future ones, protect against terrorism, secure ports, and much more. President Trump and Secretary Noem proposed eliminating FEMA. They proposed to eliminate FEMA. When FEMA's acting administrator, Cameron Hamilton, came before the Homeland Subcommittee and defended the existence of the agency he oversaw, he was summarily dismissed. I asked him the question, should we eliminate the federal emergency management agencies? And he said while he believed there were some reforms to be made, he would not recommend elimination. The very next day, he was fired. I'm aghast at the notion that this country would cease to lend our fellow countrymen a helping hand after disaster strikes, but that is the administration's goal. Earlier this month, President Trump said of disaster relief, and I quote, "We are going to give out less money. We are going to give it out directly. It will come from the president's office," end quote. Not only does he want to cut aid, President Trump is going to personally dole out relief dollars based on favoritism. Helping Americans recover from disaster cannot depend on whether their state's governor bends the knee or how their state voted in the last election. Americans are not more or less deserving of disaster aid because of how their neighbors vote. From housing to education to health care to disaster recovery, not one of our states can afford to take on the burden of everything this administration seeks to shift upon them. And everyone in this room knows that. Everyone here knows that. They have canceled the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities Program, or BRIC, a popular, effective tool for state and local governments to prevent the very damage and destruction FEMA responds to after disaster strike. It is hard to call this program wasteful when research has shown mitigation efforts like BRIC save a minimum of $6 for every dollar invested. Not far from here, the town of Crisfield, Maryland, lost $36 million for a flood protection initiative, which will be impossible for them to cover with a town budget of only $4 million. Crisfield's mayor said, and I quote, "We are pretty much devastated. Without this, we know that we will be in a really bad position to protect our citizens, protect our property, protect our community, and really protect our way of life." And this administration's reckless cuts affect all of our constituents, including mine. In the last year, Connecticut has been devastated by wildfires, historic flooding, and damaging storms. Last fall, historic rainfall and flooding washed out several roads and bridges, demolished a major shopping center in Seymour, Connecticut, called Clarity's Village. 14 of the 16 businesses in the center were destroyed, mostly family-owned. Quote, "Everything is gone. Everything is destroyed," end quote, said Mike Abe, whose restaurant, the 67 Family Diner, ended up needing nearly $1 million in repairs. His insurance company refused to help. They told him, quote, "No, thank you," end quote. This is how important the federal role for disaster relief is. This is what government must do for people in need. Connecticut announced a $5 million emergency grant program to help the victims of this disaster, but it was a FEMA federal disaster declaration that made enough funds, including SBA loans, available for the shopping centers' businesses to rebuild. This is what is at risk, thanks to President Trump and to Elon Musk. In the wake of disasters going back to Hurricanes Sandy and Irene and even before, FEMA has played a critical role in helping the people of Connecticut get back on their feet. But now, the administration is leaving them behind by stealing FEMA resources. Without the federal support, my district needs to rebuild, mitigate future disasters, staff emergency management offices. My constituents will be left hung out to dry as they try to piece their lives back together as they prepare for whatever storm strikes next. New Haven, Connecticut was to receive $25 million from FEMA for flood control, but the funding freeze is putting our mitigation efforts in jeopardy, again, leaving my constituents exposed to the next flood. In addition to mitigation, Connecticut is losing emergency management support. Like many other states, FEMA helps fund well over 100 local emergency management offices throughout Connecticut. And this administration's threats to FEMA's existence endanger Connecticut's capacity to manage future emergencies. Bill Turner, Connecticut State Emergency Management Director, said, and I quote, "The option of just getting rid of FEMA and dumping it all in the states and locals isn't going to work," end quote. Emergency management, response, recovery, and mitigation is not waste. It helps our neighbors and fellow Americans rebuild their lives after disasters, and that is not abuse. In the bill before us, House Republicans double down on the administration's effort to throw the responsibility of disaster recovery and mitigation to the states. In the face of worsening natural disasters, they seek to reduce FEMA staffing, slash funding for climate resistance, and they ignore an $8 billion shortfall in the Disaster Relief Fund. Instead of focusing on ways to help lower the cost of living, to help keep the American people safe from threats from our adversaries, extremists, and major disasters, House Republicans are using this bill to gut critical federal resources and advance their own agenda. Cannot support this bill, but my hope is that we can improve this bill to support our country's safety and security. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank the gentlelady. Are there any other members wishing to make general comments about the bill? Gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. In his speech on election night in 2024, President Trump promised to, and I quote, "make America safer and stronger," excuse me, than it has ever been before. I wonder if the American people feel safer and stronger now the administration has purged a third of the staff of Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, as was discussed by the ranking member, including almost all of the senior leadership. DOGE also cut roughly a third of the staff at FEMA. My remarks will be redundant. I presume they will get more redundant because these are the concerns that the American people have. Does that make America feel more secure as floodwaters rise, wildfires blaze, and storms rage through their community? I well remember when Superstorm Sandy hit the Northeast. 58 million people were at risk. We had a vote on the floor of the House of Representatives. Only, I think, 49, it may have been 50 Republicans voted for Sandy relief. Out of the some 200 members, Republicans that were in the House. Do Americans sleep better at night knowing that Trump has fired numerous top generals and intelligence officials at the behest of Laura Loomer, a far-right conspiracy theorist with close ties to neo-Nazi organizations? I certainly don't. I doubt Americans do either. This bill will make us even less secure and safe. It underfunds our cybersecurity efforts to stop our adversary hackers from stealing Americans' data, spreading misinformation, and infiltrating our critical systems and infrastructure. how interesting it is that most experts said that one of the responses Iran could have to our attack would have been cybersecurity attacks. And yet, we are making that less secure. This legislation also fails to address the $8 billion shortfall, which has been already referenced to by the chair and the ranking member, in FEMA's Disaster Relief Fund. Sort of like Superstorm Sandy, you're on your own. Crucially, it leaves our people vulnerable to violent extremism. I've also been proud a friend of Israel and the Jewish community. Jews in America and around the world have feared for their safety and the vile spike in anti-Semitism following the October 7th terror attacks. That is especially true these past few weeks since the murder of 2 Israeli embassy staffers just blocks away from our capital, as well as the vicious anti-Semitic attacks in Boulder, Colorado. Jewish leaders across the country have been calling on this Congress to provide at least $500 million for the Nonprofit Security Grant Program, which helps synagogues and Jewish communities and other people of faith and organizations protect themselves and their people. While I'm pleased the manager's amendments provided another $30 million for this program, and I want to thank the chairman, Mr. Amadei. I want to thank you for adding $30 million back to that. I think a very good step to take. But the bill falls $170 million short of the request, and the danger rises, and the money is going down. But I do thank you for the increase that you did do. These groups need this funding now more than ever, especially considering those security grants were paused earlier this year as part of the administration's funding freeze at FEMA. Fighting anti-Semitism, stopping terrorists, upholding our cybersecurity, and responding to disasters are not partisan issues. But this is a partisan bill. I hope at the end of this process I can support it. But if it is not significantly changed and the security enhanced, I will not be able to. And I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank the gentleman. Are there other members wishing to make general comments? Gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Wasserman Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise in strong opposition to this Homeland Security funding bill. It's hard for me to do justice here to the pain and betrayal that so many families in my community are feeling. So if I get a little emotional, I hope you understand, but it is a deeply personal issue in communities across this country. President Trump promised to focus on removing violent criminals and allow people to come here legally. But that's not what happened, not in the first Trump term and certainly not now. Instead, ICE was turned into a mass incarceration and disappearance machine. Masked men are literally leaping out of unmarked vehicles and haphazardly snatching people off of our streets. ICE now indiscriminately raids churches, schools, emergency rooms, and courtrooms. ICE is now under orders to arrest 3,000 people per day. That's regardless of whether anyone committed a crime, and it's going on with almost no oversight or due process. A report yesterday shows that nearly 2/3 of those taken by ICE had no criminal convictions of any kind. Only 7% of those arrested this year so far have any record of violent crime. Instead of keeping their promise to protect Americans from criminals and real violent threats, DHS is going after legal immigrants, people who did it the right way. This includes legal permanent residents, workers with tax IDs, dreamers, and parents who've lived here peacefully for decades. We see TPS holders and humanitarian parole recipients from Venezuela, Cuba, Haiti, and Nicaragua, people who fled socialist dictators and murderous gangs, now being stripped of their legal status and called criminal dirtbags. I repeat, the Trump administration is collaborating with dictators to send Cubans and Venezuelans with lawful status back to communist regimes where they will face torture and repression. This is a slap in the face to the freedom fighters who lost their lives in pursuit of human rights and democracy with America's backing. And let's be clear, you can't even get approved for TPS or parole without passing a criminal background check. The president and several of his appointees would not even qualify for this standard. And they are intentionally dissuading immigrants from following the law. Abusing IRS data to aid deportations will only discourage immigrants from filing taxes and incentivize businesses to hire under the table. Like so many other cruel attacks, this one doesn't lower costs for taxpayers, it puts more burden on them. And arresting moms at courthouses after their asylum and status hearings, this will only deter them from showing up to court in the first place. Taking away work permits will take hundreds of thousands out of the workforce, effectively bleeding Social Security and Medicare. Discriminatory travel bans and suspension of refugee admissions will only drive more desperate people to the border. Trump's policies do not promote legal immigration, they make it illegal. They create more chaos, more fear, more danger for immigrants and mixed status families who work hard and follow the law. And it's an insult to suggest that any of us are safer as a result. Nobody is safer when ICE officers racially profile, assault, and detain an American citizen who's 9 months pregnant, as they did this week, or when they beat up a gardener who happens to be the father of 3 sons bravely serving our country in the military. Nobody is safer when the president sends non-criminals to foreign concentration camps, or when he illegally deploys the National Guard or Marines against Americans to enforce domestic law. Nobody is safer when legal immigrant parents lose health coverage and SNAP for their citizen kids. Legal immigrant parents. Nobody is safer if anybody can be snatched off the street and sent to a country they've never seen with no due process. Nobody is safer when more than 1,100 people are crammed into a detention facility designed for 600 outside my district, nearly half of whom have no criminal record at all. And nobody's safer when DHS officers are diverted from human trafficking, fentanyl, and organized crime cases to terrorize people seeking an honest day's work. So I'm definitely not comfortable writing this administration a blank check and dismantling oversight, which is exactly what this bill proposes. This bill would pump billions into Trump's anti-immigrant rampage and allow the secretary to transfer infinite amounts to ICE from other accounts. The Republican-passed Big Ugly Bill would already allow ICE to detain children indefinitely and codify Trump's policy of separating kids from their parents. Republicans also seek to gut the Office for Civil Rights and Civil Liberties, which protects all of us from unwarranted surveillance, wrongful detention, and discrimination. To make matters worse, this bill drastically underfunds nonprofit security grants, a crucial program to shield houses of worship and other vulnerable institutions from rising anti-Semitism and hate crimes. Just 2 weeks ago, everyone in this room voted for a non-binding resolution condemning anti-Semitic attacks and calling for action to protect Jewish Americans. While I appreciate that this bill contains a slight increase over current funding for nonprofit security grants, it's truly unacceptable that this bill barely surpasses 60% of what Jewish, Black, Asian American, and other community leaders have requested and is desperately needed. This bill also abolishes grants that aim to prevent terrorism and target violence after Trump installed a 22-year-old fanboy with no experience in command of the Counterterrorism Center. I look forward to debating the amendments to mitigate the worst aspects of this bill, but I cannot in good conscience support putting more money in the clutches of this administration without clear conditions that they follow the law. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank the gentlelady. The gentlelady from Ohio, Ms. Capter, is recognized for general comments on the bill.
Thank you. Chairman Cole and Ranking Member DeLauro, Chair Amidei, and Ranking Member Underwood, I rise to express concern about the array of security issues facing the United States. One of the most important steps a family can do if they want to secure their own home is maintain a responsible budget. The same principle should apply to Homeland Security at the national level. Yet we've experienced month-long delays waiting for a proper and full budget request from this administration. It is now late June. We are still waiting for the full Trump budget. What is the majority waiting for? Delay forsakes the men and women who work to secure our border, counter hostile foreign actors, both directly and online, combat the opioid epidemic, and protect our coastlines. This bill fails to adequately address issues related to strengthen our border security and reduce the flow of migrants towards our southern and northern borders, as the bill defunds Customs and Border Patrol by $249 million. It is peculiar that the Trump administration has farmed out counterterrorism to a 22-year-old whose most recent experience is bagging groceries and landscaping. We are under potential terrorist threats from countries that seek to do us harm, while a glorified intern has been put in charge of combating terrorism here at home? Does anyone remember 9/11? Additionally, a member from the Great Lakes region and co-chair of the House Great Lakes Task Force, I rise to tell you that over the past several decades, the inadequate capacity of the U.S. Coast Guard Great Lakes icebreaking fleet has resulted in economic losses estimated at $2 billion, with the loss of over 10,000 jobs over the last 10 years in our Great Lakes region. Despite this reality, the proposal fails to appropriate the amount necessary dedicated to fund a new Great Lakes icebreaker. Lastly, the bill dramatically cuts our cybersecurity and infrastructure security programs. Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, they're applauding, and they're launching wave upon wave of cyber attacks against our country. And these attacks are increasing every year. This majority cuts our premier cybersecurity agency that others have referenced, CISA, by $134.8 million below previous levels. Why would America do this, especially now when we are in a war mode? Without significant changes to the legislation, including those I've discussed today, I regret I will be unable to support this current bill, as our nation will not be safer for our own citizens. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank the gentlelady. The gentleman from New York, Mr. Espaillat, is recognized for general comments on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I rise today to express my deep concerns about this legislation and the activities of ICE, CBP, and other elements of DHS under this administration, which are challenging the community's safety, the continuity of thousands of families, and the rule of law. I do so, Mr. Chairman, because I've seen firsthand, in fact, I've been an eyewitness, that the mass deportation efforts are not about deporting a violent criminal, a violent felon that was found guilty in a court of law, as they should be deported. It's ultimately also about green card holders that are legally here in our country, people that have work permits that were issued by our government so they can motivate the economy and pay taxes, and ultimately is also about U.S. citizens. I personally visited a family in Mexico with 4 U.S. children that were deported, including a 10-year-old girl with a serious brain tumor. That family was stopped at a checkpoint on their way to the hospital for that little girl in Texas to get the kind of health care that's going to save her life. And yet now she stands stranded in Mexico, not being able to get the life-saving treatment she needs. So this is not just about violent criminals. This is about people that are here legally, including U.S. citizens. And so to put these agencies on steroids and give them the funding, unrestricted in many ways, to deport U.S. citizens and really set out fear and a chilling effect across America that's hurting our small businesses, that's unleashing uncontrolled operations, including the ability for ICE to go into houses of worship where people are concerned that they got to pay to pray. Mr. Chairman, people have to pay to pray, meaning not paying monetarily, but paying with a potential deportation when they go to worship their God. That operation could have occurred outside the church. I will speak about this later on. But paying to pray by paying with your own physical removal of a house of worship is un-American. Fundamentally is un-American. This country, our country, values our ability to pray to our own God and without any interruptions. And so to see potentially a masked ICE agent come into a house of worship to remove somebody is pay to pray. And so I think that we need to be sensible and we need to be Americans about this effort to fund these agencies. And the most important component that we should all protect is the rule of law. We must preserve and protect the rule of law. That is the spinal cord of our democracy and our nation. And we must preserve it at any cost. I think that the funding, extreme funding of some of the agencies that are impacted by this bill and their unrestricted operations goes against our fundamental values as a nation. And for that purpose, Mr. Chairman, I am asking that we vote against this. America relies on the rule of law. People should not pay to pray. U.S. citizens should not be deported from their own country, particularly children. We should have a balanced approach to government that, yes, deports a violent criminal who has committed a crime and has been found guilty in court, but doesn't take a 10-year-old little girl with a brain tumor whose life is in danger. In fact, the illness is so rare and serious that it doesn't even have a name. And we should be Americans at every step of the way. We start by doing that today here in this committee room and voting in the negative of this bill, for this bill. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. The gentlelady from New Jersey, Ms. Watson Coleman, is recognized for general comments on the bill.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. The majority's priorities in this bill simply do not meet the needs of the American people. It makes devastating cuts to crucial programs that Americans rely on in their most desperate moments. This bill will reduce funding for FEMA's emergency food and shelter program by $25 million, a nearly 20% cut from the last time we properly funded it. And it completely eliminates the shelter and service program, which will severely weaken initiatives that protected refugees and asylum seekers in need. The Emergency Food and Shelter Program actually reduces longer-term costs by providing temporary, organized shelter that helps lessen the strain on hospitals, local law enforcement, and social services. Without this program, these entities will have to navigate more complex recovery challenges, prolonging the consequences of their catastrophe. The targeted elimination of any program that aids in the sheltering of our most vulnerable population guarantees an increased strain on local resources and reduces the overall effectiveness of disaster response efforts. But, Mr. Chairman, I must express my frustration with the $11 billion dollars allocated to ICE in this bill, especially in light of the recent events in Los Angeles and across our country. I refuse to allow this body to ignore what is taking place in our backyards. We are witnessing the growth of detention centers in the state of New Jersey, which can only indicate the administration's agenda to overpopulate the centers with innocent people. I refuse to stand by and watch my constituents suffer. This is the clear weaponization of federal agents and the entire Department of Homeland Security. What we are witnessing in Los Angeles and elsewhere is not just a routine enforcement operation. It is a traumatic show of force that tears families apart, spreads fear throughout our communities, and targets individuals with no criminal record or offense. We just saw what happened to Narcisco Blanco in California, a father of three, a United States Marine, beaten like a dog. And for what? Mothers, fathers, farmers, teachers, you name it. My colleagues are sitting back and watching ICE break laws put into place to protect our constituents. And you mean to tell me that we want to place more taxpayer dollars in their hands while they are terrorizing people in our communities? The action taken by ICE and DHS officers are what we would see in a Gestapo country, not in the United States of America. As if we needed more proof of that, our administration is allowing, maybe even more encouraging, these cowards to cover their faces to keep the public from identifying them. We already know ICE has no respect for congressional authority. I witnessed their disrespect firsthand when I was exercising my statutory right as a member of Congress to conduct an oversight visit at Delaney Hall earlier this year. We also saw what happened to our colleague, Senator Padilla, someone you know well, certainly they knew well. What they did to him, manhandling him and shoving him and throwing him to the ground, they did that in the state that he represents. It is as if my Republican colleagues think that what happened to Senator Padilla could never happen to them. Newsflash, it can. I cannot in good faith support such a deeply inadequate bill. I refuse to turn my back on the cries of my constituents to appease a racist in the White House, and for that reason, I urge a no vote and I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. The gentleman from Hawaii, Mr. Case, is recognized for general comments on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, I want to commend the subcommittee chair, the gentleman from the state whose flower is Artemisia tridentata, and also the ranking member, because this subcommittee, it can be a very difficult subcommittee, as we're going to see from our debate today. And it's the kind of a subcommittee that can get away from you real fast. And you have both operated this subcommittee in a way to facilitate the civility, courtesy, and a real debate. However, having said that, this is a good demonstration that courtesy and civility alone do not produce a good bill. And many of my colleagues have pointed to deficiencies in the bill that I share with them, but I want to highlight two areas that I think are highly problematic and that I hope and believe can be fixed going forward. And those are FEMA and the Cybersecurity Information and Security Infrastructure and Security Agency, or CISA. We had long debates in subcommittee about what is a continuing vendetta, if I can put it that way, against FEMA. That is, to this day, unexplainable, inexplicable to me. Now, I have personal experience with this, with the incredible disaster in Lahaina that I detailed at great length in our subcommittee, where we do not believe that FEMA did a bad job. We think FEMA saved the day for us. And this is a personal experience that I think other people would have shared in places like California, North Carolina, Florida, Louisiana, et cetera. And so it is really inexplicable to me that there is a continuing effort to underfund FEMA, to somehow call out FEMA's credibility, to chalk some motivation that I don't understand up to waste, fraud, and abuse. We didn't see waste, fraud, and abuse in Lahaina. We saw the expenditure of necessary monies by our federal government that saved the day after a terrible disaster. And so it's something that I think we need to discuss. Now, if you want to talk about policy here, about a policy of decentralizing the federal government down to the state government level, then let's talk about how that actually works when a small state especially gets overwhelmed by a massive natural disaster, or any other disaster for that matter, because we're not just talking about natural. So what is the policy? If you want to say, well, the state should take care of this, then let's take Hawaii, for example. How should Hawaii have responded to a disaster of this magnitude? And is it not a good policy to maintain the federal government as the central administrator of common uniform disaster responses across our country? That's the policy decision that we're not, and debate that we're not having. And if that's where you want to go with this, then let's have that debate, and then let's have funding follow the policy. Now, let me switch over to cybersecurity, because it is also inexplicable to me that you are reducing funding for cybersecurity at a time when we all know, or should know, that if we want to look at exposure from malign actors across the world, including the last few days, one of our greatest exposures is in the cybersecurity realm. This is when we need to be ramping up cybersecurity across our country, not defunding cybersecurity. And let's take a look at what you've done in this bill. You have reduced cybersecurity proper by $87 million. You have cut infrastructure security. You have cut risk management operations. And it's similarly inexplicable to me that you would somehow call out these areas of the greatest need for cuts. Now, is that a waste, fraud, and abuse argument? Because I don't see it at all. Let's just talk about infrastructure, just to pick out one of the areas that you have reduced funding in. Anybody that knows what malign actors are up to in the cybersecurity space now knows that they are not necessarily and exclusively focused on national security, cybersecurity. No, what they're after is civilian infrastructure. They're after electric grids. They're after water systems. They're after things that can disrupt the civilian infrastructure. They want control. They want to be able to control that. They want to be able to trigger cybersecurity at the proper time. And this is an area that state governments, county governments, and companies need incredible amounts of highly sophisticated advice and resources to prepare for and to identify and to fight. And yet you have reduced infrastructure cybersecurity. It's inexplicable to me. And so I would really urge that in these two areas in particular, you take a look at the judgments that you're making on a policy basis and then follow that with funding as you go through the process. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. The gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Mervan, is recognized for general comments on the bill.
Thank you, Chairman Cole, Ranking Member DeLauro, Subcommittee Chair and Ranking Member. Prior to my time as a member of Congress, I served 15 years as a local elected official. In that capacity, I was responsible for providing certain emergency assistance, including the leading and coordinating of responses to natural disasters, such as storms and flooding. While I appreciate the times of filling sandbags and removing debris, I am reminded of those heightened moments now as we consider our funds for agencies and public servants that keep our community safe and respond to our times of great need. Notably, I appreciate the essential work and the role of FEMA plays to respond to natural disasters and the incredible personnel who must coordinate with state and local officials and nonprofits and volunteers to rise to those occasions. Knowing firsthand of this type of support of FEMA, I am concerned that this legislation allows for severe cuts to FEMA's workforce and threatens our ability to effectively respond to emergencies and distribute life-saving aid. Reducing staffing and expertise at an agency will not make FEMA more efficient. Instead, it will make it harder for states and localities to respond to emergencies and cause further harm for individuals and families uprooted by natural disasters. We are all aware of the increase in the extreme weather events, so it is more important than ever to ensure FEMA has the personnel, support, and institutional knowledge required to respond rapidly to evolving emergencies. Additionally, I am concerned that this legislation eliminates funding for terrorism and targeted violence prevention grants. This program helps local communities proactively prevent violence by bringing together the mental health providers, educators, nonprofits, and public safety officials. In Indiana, this grant has supported the development of an online wellness pilot program to reduce targeted violence for youth in high-risk communities. Terminating this funding harms our public safety by leaving our communities more vulnerable to violence and extremism. I also would highlight that the closing of the Countering Weapons of Mass Destruction Office would increase the likelihood of dangerous attacks. Established in 2018 on a bipartisan basis, this office leads the Department of Homeland Security's efforts to detect and deter chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear threats. Even if we transfer its funds across the Department of Homeland Security, getting rid of the office's personnel and expertise could cost us essential tools and protect our national security. Further, I believe that this bill further weakens our cybersecurity and infrastructure security at the time of rising threats against government, American businesses, schools, and state and local governments. Since the beginning of this year, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency has lost nearly 1/3 of its staff, and its election security operations have been gutted. I regret that the refusal to invest in the expertise and resources needed to protect our critical infrastructure, including our election infrastructure, jeopardizes our national security and leaves Americans more open to attacks from foreign adversaries. In conclusion, I support the intention of the Homeland Security appropriation measures to prioritize helping our communities and our nation respond to ever-changing threats. Whether those threats come from natural disasters and emergencies, violent extremists, or attacks on our physical and cyber infrastructure. And unfortunately, I regret that this bill severely undercuts these priorities. I thank the chairman and the time, and I look forward to debate on this issue. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman for his comments. Are there other members wishing to make general comments about the bill? Seeing no other members wishing to make opening remarks, I'd like to recognize Chairman Amodei to offer a manager's amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank the gentlelady from Illinois and her staff and mine for working on the manager's amendment in the spirit of cooperation. The amendment makes technical edits to the bill and report and adds several new sections of report language requested by committee members on both sides of the aisle. This amendment also includes an additional $30 million for the Nonprofit Security Grant Program at a time of rising threats to houses of worship and increasing anti-Semitism. We want to ensure that communities at risk have the means to protect themselves. I might also add that we had money in the Israel supplement that was about a year ago. About half of that is out. There is still money in that account, so it's not like the cupboard is bare and we're trying to backfill it. I would also remind members that if this amount gets oversubscribed, that this committee also has the jurisdiction at any time to return to this issue, just like we did in the Israel supplemental. And guess what? I yield back.
Your popularity is going up by the minute. Gentlelady from Illinois, Ms. Underwood, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I urge my colleagues to support this manager's amendment, and I'm so proud of the priorities we were able to secure in it. My amendment requiring Customs and Border Protection to ensure it has a policy to facilitate the safe treatment of pregnant, postpartum, and nursing people in its custody. My amendment ensuring that former members of the armed services are included in data collected by the Office of Homeland Security Statistics. And my amendment directing the department to lift the freeze on hiring mental health providers for the United States Secret Service. This manager's amendment also includes language I worked on to help the Coast Guard train physicians and hopefully other medical providers, and to expand the Coast Guard's legal and oversight capacity to respond to sexual assault and sexual harassment. In addition, it includes language that Congresswoman Watson-Coleman and I worked on together to protect the public's right to record immigration enforcement actions in public spaces. Lastly, this amendment includes language I wrote to ensure that none of the funds in this bill may be used in violation of the First, Fourth, Fifth, or Sixth Amendments to the United States Constitution. These are some of the most basic fundamental rights that define us as Americans: freedom of speech and assembly, the right to due process, protection against unreasonable searches, and access to a fair trial. We should not need to reaffirm them today. But we cannot accept selective enforcement of the Constitution, and as Congress, we have a responsibility to provide the essential checks and balances that preserve those rights. These provisions are essential improvements that strengthen this bill's integrity, safeguard our Constitution and civil liberties, and support the people on the front lines of our Homeland Security mission. I am proud of the priorities we were able to secure together, and I urge my colleagues to support the manager's amendment. I yield back.
Thank the gentlelady. Do any other members seek recognition to speak on the amendment? Gentleman from Texas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I also want to thank the chairman of the committee, the ranking member, for adding one of these amendments that is so important to me. I live there at the border where I get to talk to a lot of Border Patrol agents, a lot of Border Patrol chiefs, all the way to the CBP commissioners and secretaries of Homeland. And one of the problems we've had is that for years we've added enough money to hire 22,000 Border Patrol agents. But there's a problem with the hiring process, and that has to do with the polygraph exam. And what we're asking here is we're not waiving the polygraph exam. What we're doing is we're streamlining where we're giving the CBP commissioner the ability to look at people that have got clear backgrounds as veterans, clear backgrounds that is that they hold a active top secret clearance, or who have completed a current single scope background investigation. And this is important because even if they feel that they should, even somebody has a top secret and they can still administer the polygraph exam. This is something that we need to do because otherwise we can keep adding monies and still be at 22,000 men and women at Border Patrol and still be short by thousands of people. So I want to thank the chairman. I know some of us have been talking about this for a long time, but I think this is a balanced approach to streamline the hiring process. And I want to thank the chairman and the ranking member for this. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. The gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Siscomboni, is recognized to comment on the manager's amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise in support of the manager's amendment. I was glad to work with you, Mr. Chairman, and your team to get a $30 million increase included in the amendment for the nonprofit security grant. In FY 2024, organizations located in my district in Arizona received over $1.3 million in NSGP funding. These grants continue to make a real difference on the ground, helping houses of worship and other nonprofit institutions bolster their security in the face of rising threats. The need for increased funding is especially clear after the recent incident in Colorado, which serves as a stark reminder that that the threat environment for the religious and particularly the Jewish community remains very high. Thank you again for working with me on this increase and my colleagues as well. I know that many others were involved in this effort. So with that, I yield back. Thank you, sir.
Thank the gentleman. Do any other members seek recognition to speak on the amendment? Seeing none, I recognize Chairman Amadei for 1 minute to close.
I recommend your bipartisan nationwide support. I yield back.
The questions on the amendment, all those in favor say aye. All those opposed say no. The opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the amendment is adopted. I now recognize Chairman Amadei to offer a Republican en bloc amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The amendment before us codifies necessary changes in our asylum and credible fear processes. While the administration has made incredible strides in closing our borders, these changes are critical to ensuring we don't have a repeat of rampant illegal immigration in the future. These provisions are necessary to allow us to maintain the progress we've seen in the past 6 months. Additionally, last year, Mr. Gonzalez asked ICE for a full accounting of the number of aliens on the non-detained docket who had criminal convictions in America. The response was shocking. ICE noted that more than 600,000 aliens present in the United States had current or pending criminal convictions. ICE must prioritize their resources to arrest, detain, and deport those who have harmed or intend to harm our fellow citizens. This amendment ensures ICE does exactly that. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. The gentlelady from Illinois, Ms. Underwood, is recognized.
I rise in opposition to the amendment, and I urge my colleagues to vote no. I yield back.
Thank the gentlelady. Do any other amendments seek recognition? Members seek recognition to speak on the en bloc amendment? Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise in support of the Republican en bloc amendment, which includes my amendment to restore integrity and common sense to our asylum process. Under current law, an alien arriving at our southern border can claim fear of persecution and be released into the United States based on a significant possibility standard. That bar is simply too low. This weak standard gave the Biden-Harris administration cover to let 8 million illegal aliens flood into the country, most of whom will never meet the criteria for asylum, but will be here anyway. This amendment corrects that. It aligns credible fear determinations with a more appropriate threshold, more likely than not, that the aliens' claims are true and that they would ultimately qualify for asylum. This language mirrors Section 102 of the Secure Border Act, which this House passed last Congress. Let me be clear. President Trump's return to office has helped reestablish order at the border. If we want to ensure that the floodgates stay closed, we must stop allowing our asylum laws to be exploited by bad actors. This amendment strengthens the standard, restores credibility to the asylum system, and supports the officers on the front lines of our border crisis. Additionally, this Republican en bloc includes another provision that I offered to prevent asylum shopping and uphold the principle that asylum is intended for protection, not for personal preference. International law, including the UN's own guidelines, states that asylum seekers should not be returned to danger. But it does not say that they have a right to choose the wealthiest country as their destination. If someone is truly fleeing persecution, they should seek protection in the first safe country that they enter, not ignore multiple safe nations just to get to the United States. This amendment ensures that those who transit through another country must first apply for asylum there, just as Section 101 of the Secure Border Act requires. The vast majority of border crossers today are not fleeing danger, they are exploiting loopholes. This is about fairness. It's about ensuring our asylum system serves those in true need, not those coached by cartels on how to game the system. I urge my colleagues to support this amendment and help restore sanity to our immigration laws, and I yield back.
Thank the gentleman for his comments. Do any other members seek recognition to speak on the en bloc amendment? Seeing none, I recognize Chairman Amade for 1 minute to close.
Urge my colleagues to support this amendment, and I yield back.
The questions on the amendment, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the amendment is adopted. Before we proceed, let me just make a quick announcement. I don't know if this is good news or bad news, but the brief on Iran has been postponed, so we'll be able to stay here and work. I know you're all excited about that. I now recognize Dr. Harris to offer an en bloc bipartisan amendment. Oh, Dr. Harris not here. I'm sorry, he must have left for the moment, so we'll set that aside and move on. Oh, here he comes. We're just recognizing you for your amendment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I have an amendment at the desk and ask unanimous consent to waive the reading.
Without objection, the reading of the amendments dispensed with, and Dr. Harris is recognized to present his amendment.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, what this amendment does, it actually combines several proposed amendments. It's an amendment that on issues that we've dealt with before in the committee. One of the parts of it exempts the H-2B workers that received visas in the past 5 fiscal years from the statutory cap. So this removes the H-2B employers who are what are called certified employers. That is, they've followed the rules. They're certified by the department as being an H-2B employer. This removes the uncertainty they face every year with the lottery system, which picks winners and losers. So what it does says you're a certified employer, you can have the same number of employees, you can have the same number of H-2B workers in a given year that you've had in the past 5 fiscal years. It also incorporates Mr. Newhouse's proposals from the past that expand H-2A temporary agriculture worker visa seasonality. It includes an amendment that prohibits funding to modernize the H-2 program requirements, oversights, and workers' protection rules just to make it easier to find H-2 workers. And it has the last part of it is one by Mr. Edwards and Molinar that allows the admission of temporary circus and carnival workers under the P-visa system. So what it does, it takes a lot of the temporary worker issues that we've had and deals with them. Why do we need to do this now? Because, as the administration attempts to remove people who are here illegally, illegal immigrants, it would allow some of those positions to functionally be replaced by people who are here under temporary work visas, not to be confused with illegal immigration, these temporary work visas, and provide some certainty to employers who, again, in all these programs, they have to attempt to seek American employees first. They have to pay the wages that you would pay to an American employee, and if you can't find one, then you'd be eligible to have this temporary foreign worker here. I think it's the right time to make these definitive changes to those temporary worker programs to aid our employers, who again are going through, some of whom go through a difficult time because of the removal of some of the millions of people admitted in the last 4 years and who are being removed. So with that, I would urge support of the en bloc amendment.
Thank the gentleman. Chairman Amade is recognized to address the Harris en bloc amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the gentleman's amendment, and I thank him for his willingness to include Mr. Newhouse's and Mr. Edwards' positions in his bipartisan en bloc amendment. I support the general ideas behind some of these amendments in the en bloc, and I know that we take similar amendments every year on a bipartisan basis. I'm not suggesting that we do anything else. I do recommend we approve his amendment. However, changes to visa policy are just that, policy changes that should be worked with Chairman Jordan and the authorizing committee. This committee's jurisdiction over such policy changes, especially ones that change the Immigration Nationality Act, is probably not present. But if we don't support these to drive the conversation with the folks in the policy area, then what the heck? And so, while I have the utmost respect for the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, it's time that they come out of the weeds and weigh in on this so that we have to stop tiptoeing around the edges of what our jurisdiction is. I encourage your bipartisan, nationwide support.
Thank you, gentlemen. Gentlelady from Illinois, Ms. Underwood, is recognized to address the Harris en bloc amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This amendment requires an expansion of the H-2B visa cap based on overall demand in the last 5 years. It expands the H-2A agricultural work visa by broadening the definition of agricultural labor. It prohibits funding to modernize H-2 program requirements, oversight, and worker protections rule, and it expands the use of P visas to circus carnival workers. I understand that each of our districts may have unique needs as it relates to these various programs covered by this bipartisan en bloc amendment, and I appreciate our colleagues working together across the aisle to offer it. I plan to support the amendment, and I yield back.
Thank the gentlelady. Do any other members seek recognition to speak on the en bloc amendment? Gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Edwards, recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, in Western North Carolina, our local businesses, farms, and community traditions don't just define our economy, they define who we are. They're family-run, hardworking, and deeply rooted in the values of self-reliance and service. But these pillars of our district are being threatened, not by regulation or global markets, but by something as simple and fixable as labor certainty. That's why this visa en bloc is so important. This en bloc is a series of thoughtful, narrowly tailored amendments that offer practical solutions to support American workers and small businesses without expanding immigration, all while strengthening our rural way of life. Let's start with Congressman Harris's Certified Seasonal Employers Amendment, which addresses a growing crisis for small seasonal employers. These are businesses that follow every rule. They hire American workers first, paying prevailing wages, and meet every federal requirement. But due to overwhelming demand and outdated visa lottery system, many are being shut out of the H-2B program year after year. This amendment gives a lifeline to those who've demonstrated 5 consecutive years of full compliance by guaranteeing a set number of returning visas. This doesn't just help those employers, it helps every other small business that faces labor uncertainty because it's trying to use the overprescribed H-2B program and it supports their communities. These are people who sponsor Little League teams, serve on local boards, and keep our small towns alive. We owe it to them to reward reliability and integrity with a stable, predictable process. Congressman Newhouse's H-2A seasonality amendment is equally important. This is a vital fix for agriculture producers. In NC-11, farming means high-value specialty crops, including apples, tomatoes, vegetables, and your Christmas tree. These crops don't grow on the same schedule, and yet our visa rules treat them as if they do. Right now, when the apple harvest ends in Henderson County, those visa workers must leave, even if nearby growers still need them to plant or harvest. That makes 0 sense. This amendment gives the agriculture industry the flexibility needed to retain skilled and legal seasonal laborers across crop cycles and across employers for up to 12 months. It's not an expansion of the program, it's just a smarter use of the workers that we already have. Lastly, we need to address a unique but equally critical workforce need faced by our county fairs, agricultural shows, and festivals. These are more than events. They're cornerstones of our communities, supporting FFA chapters, 4-H clubs, and local charities. But the carnivals and mobile entertainment companies that make these possible are struggling with an unsustainable labor shortage. That's why I'm leading an amendment to transition approximately 10,000 carnival workers from the overstretched H-2B program into the more appropriate P visa category, originally designed for traveling performers and entertainment professionals. This simple fix preserves a cherished part of our all-American culture while freeing up thousands of H-2B slots for other employers, including farmers, landscapers, and foresters, each of which are also desperate for relief. Together, these amendments deliver targeted, conservative solutions that reflect the needs and values of Western North Carolina. They protect local jobs, reward good actors, and help stabilize the seasonal workforce that we so desperately need. I urge the adoption of this en bloc amendment, and I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. The gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Bishop, is recognized to address the en bloc amendment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I rise in support of this bipartisan en bloc amendment. While I continue to oppose the underlying bill, the amendment would help provide more workforce certainty to seasonal employees and agricultural producers and preserve markets for consumers. Right now, America's farmers and foresters are having a hard time getting the workers they need to bring their goods to market. Our food supply chain is a matter of national security, and forestry products are essential in every American household, whether it be wood, paper, or pulp. Adoption of the amendment will allow for year-round H-2A workers, as well as cut red tape and onerous reporting requirements for employers who have followed the rules and who demonstrate a strong need for temporary foreign workers. I support this amendment to help bring more certainty to America's seasonal employers and agricultural producers, and in turn, to American consumers. Passage of the amendment, however, will not be enough to overcome my opposition to the underlying bill. But I think it's a good amendment. I think it's good for American agriculture and good for American consumers. I thank you, and with that, I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Cuellar, is recognized for his remarks on the en bloc amendment.
Chairman, thank you so much. And again, to the chairman of the subcommittee and the ranking member and the co-sponsors and the lead person, Dr. Harris, and the other members that are co-sponsors. And Shelley also, I know you and I have been talking about this for a long time. Look, members, every single member in this room knows that either you know somebody that is affected by the H-2B, H-2A, or the P visas for the circus or carnival. Everybody in this room, you know it does. As we are seeing our economy, there are certain jobs that Americans don't want to do. And I'll say first, give those jobs to the Americans, any American worker that wants to do that. But if we can't find that, then we got to work with the H-2B, H-2A, and the P visas for the circus and carnival workers. Certainly, the H-2B amendment, it's a bipartisan support that works on the past 5 years, as it was mentioned on the statutory. We're not expanding this. We're using this in a very smart way, efficient way to address the needs that we have. So certainly the ability to hire H-2B visas when workers, American workers, are not available makes sense. And again, it's to make sure that we address, because most of this are small, hardworking individuals, businesses that we need to address. So H-2B, seasonal businesses play a very significant role in our nation's economy, and we need to make sure that we help them so they can continue contributing to our economy. And again, the H-2A amendment, the temporary agricultural worker, to make sure that we address that. And I know we're going to go with another amendment that I think Mr. Valera is going to offer and amend the parole for the agriculture. I support that also. But again, we know in the agriculture area, we need workers there. My father, my mother were workers in the ag, and it's hard. You know, anybody that wants to go out there work in the hot fields, it's very, 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 very hard. And again, if you don't have an American worker, you gotta find somebody that can do this. So this is again important. And finally, the P visa, the temporary circus and carnival workers. You know, again, name any place of the country and you will have that. San Antonio, I've seen that. Laredo, WBCA, we've seen that. Name any place and you will see the circus or the carnival workers, and we got to help those. So again, give those jobs to Americans, but some of those jobs are hard, and if we can, we got to find this solution. So to all the co-sponsors of this bipartisan folks that have been working on this for many years, Mr. Chairman, I ask that we support this bipartisan amendment.
Thank the gentleman. Now recognize the gentleman from Washington, Mr. Newhouse, for his remarks on the en bloc amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to appreciate the hard work of the chairman of the subcommittee, Mr. Amadei, as well as the ranking member. I also want to point out the hard work that Dr. Harris has been providing in this effort to truly make some important changes in our immigrant work visa programs. So thank you very much for that. And this, as you have heard from several speakers, these are bipartisan efforts. Many people recognize the importance of having an immigrant workforce, but I want to underscore we want a legal immigrant workforce, and these changes work towards that end. So this en bloc includes two important provisions that I have proposed, and I'll just briefly talk about those. But the first one clarifies the initial statutory intent to allow admission of foreign workers for temporary or seasonal work based upon the terms of the job offer, so long as the duration of that job offer meets the current regulatory definitions of temporary or seasonal, which is less than 1 year. Now, those of you that have been here for a couple of years may notice that this is a small change from language that I've offered in previous years. This language is not as comprehensive in that it does not change the underlying statute to eliminate entirely the need for the agricultural job to be temporary or seasonal, which has unfortunately previously encountered some opposition at the Rules Committee, with one recent exception. Nevertheless, the proposed language to clarify what it's already on the books would go a long ways in addressing labor needs in all of agriculture by allowing the farmer to set the terms of the job offer, enabling the worker to maintain non-immigrant status and circular migration, so long as the duration of the job does not exceed the duration of temporary or seasonal, as defined in the regulations, if that makes sense. So we're not changing law, we're just changing the ability of the farmer that offers the employment, that allow him to make sure that, or him or her, that the job follows the definition of current law. Newhouse number 2 would block new regulatory requirements that the previous administration finalized as literally as they were packing up their offices late in December of 2024. And it became effective merely 3 days before the inauguration of President Trump. So in this last-minute effort, DHS finalized new regulatory requirements that expanded its authority over labor law, establishing policies that allow H-2A workers to roam around the country without a valid new contract in place, and essentially creating strict liability for growers based on the actions of third parties in a foreign country, all of which would jeopardize the entire H-2A program, which is essential to so many farms in order to stay in business. So I would encourage my colleagues to work with this bipartisan team to build a strong legal workforce and encourage all members to support this amendment. And just a small comment on the observations of Chairman Amadei. I've heard Chairman Cole say many times, we don't authorize in the Appropriations Committee, we appropriate. But I would agree that it is very important for us to engage in this important debate and conversation. to build support and momentum so that the authorizing committees, in this particular case, the Judiciary Committee, can feel that urgency and that momentum so that we can actually make important changes to policy and to law. And I think this is an important step for us to do as the Appropriation Committee to weigh in on this important topic. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. I urge support and I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. I think I actually quoted Chairman Simpson, who once told me, we don't authorize on an appropriation bill until we do. That I want to recognize my good friend, the gentlelady from Ohio, for any remarks she has on the en bloc amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have a clarification because as we began discussing this amendment, there was reference made to rural areas that have seasonal needs for harvesting and so forth. But then it morphed a little bit into circuses and carnivals. And I wanted to get some clarification on what is included because I represent a very large amusement park called Cedar Fair, but it only operates 3/4 of the year or less. How do you look upon parks such as Disney World or Kings Island? There are different water parks in other parts of the country, many of which are seasonal. How do you define, you started out talking about circuses and carnivals. Is there a definition of that?
Gentleman from North Carolina is recognized to answer the gentlelady's question.
Yes, thanks for the question. There are different types of P visas. There are different categories. And depending on the seasonality, if you will, would be the what the applicant would request. I think there's like 6 different variations of a P visa.
So it would not necessarily preclude these organizations, these
No,
businesses?
not necessarily. I would view those, while I'm not an attorney, I would view those as entertainers inside of a bigger organization.
Thank you. And I yield back.
Gentlelady from Maine, Ms. Pingree, is recognized for her comments on the en bloc amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to thank my colleagues who have been working on some of these H-2B related issues and make a few remarks about how they impact in Maine. First, I just want to say this is the Homeland Appropriations Committee, and we will have a lot of debate today related to immigration issues. And in my opinion, most of them go back to the fact that this Congress has been unwilling during the period of time I've been here to pass comprehensive immigration reform. Let's just get that done. We are going to have endless debate today, and it is all related to the fact that we don't straighten out the situation that goes on in our country, the need for workers, the need to make sure that we have legal processes for people, and the need to make sure that farmers and hospitality industry and everyone else has all the people they need to do the job. I also want to concur, we shouldn't be authorizing on an appropriating committee, but we do when we do, and we all use it when we can, because things like this are so vital, and this amendment comes up every year, and I'm always pleased to work with my colleague, Mr. Harris, and so many others, Mr. Cuellar, who also have these concerns. Dutch, who used to be on the committee. If you have any kind of a seasonal industry, you know what we're talking about. And this one also includes some agriculture, which is very much the same. So I remind you all that I represent Maine. This is our summer season. I hope you're all planning your August vacations, your opportunity to eat some lobster, have some wild blueberries, spend a little time on the ocean, and see our wonderful state. If you want, you can come in the winter, where we also have a seasonal industry of skiing and winter sports. So we'd love to have you either time. Tourism is our largest industry, and while we're very proud of our agriculture, fishing, manufacturing, the other things we do, we depend on tourism. And like so many other states, we don't have enough people to do the jobs. Now, it's a common summer job for kids. All my kids worked in the seasonal industry. I've worked in the seasonal industry. We've owned businesses in the seasonal industry. And the challenge is, while people say, oh, what a great summer job for kids, by the time it gets to August, they're back to school, they're back to sports. You can't finish out the season. And we are thrilled that our tourists stay through October or come in even early November now, but we don't have enough people to do the work. And I can list countless employers who come to visit me every year and say, what's going to be the situation? How many workers? Will I be able to get the number of people that I need? I have examples of a family here who had a family-owned seafood restaurant for 17 years. They've been able to run their business, support local fishermen, because they have H-2B workers. Motels, and when they don't have enough people, they close down a wing. They can't be open for the season that they want because they don't have enough people. So without these visas that are so necessary, without these kinds of amendments that we have to sponsor usually every year, because we're always at odds with the system, we can't do it. So I just want to support all the people who work on this, but I want to encourage us all to find an ultimate solution so that we're not here every year authorizing on this committee and also dealing with a hodgepodge solution to immigration reform. With that, I'd love to yield the rest of my time to Mr. Cuellar for his thoughts.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to clarify something to Ms. Capter. On the circus part of it, if you look at the section dealing with the P, it deals with mobile entertainment provider, which means a carnival or circus that travels around the United States on a temporary basis, or seasonal worker, et cetera. So there is a definition there for the circus worker. So I just wanted to, you asked for a definition, and if you look at the amendment, there is a definition that. With that, I yield back the balance of my time. Thank you, Ms. Pingree.
Thank the gentleman. Gentlelady from Texas, Ms. Escobar, is recognized for her comments on the en bloc amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to the ranking member. And thanks to Chairman Amadei and Ranking Member Underwood for their collegiality on this subcommittee. I also want to add my support to this, but really wanted to speak to the overall effort and in a way echoing what Ms. Pingree just mentioned. It's heartening when we are able to work together in a bipartisan way on an issue that has become one of the most toxic issues in America. And I wish we could take a look at the overall issue instead of just the narrow focus on agriculture. I completely agree. I mean, we've got to put food on the table. We need to support our farmers. But if you, like me, have been visited by CEOs and companies across the country, all of the various sectors that need workers, if you, like me, have looked at our census numbers and see that families are not having babies at the same rate that families used to. I mean, my parents had 12 siblings each. I don't know many of us who are having 12 kids anymore. At the same time, we're getting older. And if we want to remain a competitive nation, we need immigration reform. And obviously, we're not here to do immigration reform. We're the Appropriations Committee. I can tell you, having come from the Judiciary Committee, we are pretty far from doing immigration reform in any meaningful way, and that has to change. And it has to change with these bipartisan conversations, with the ability for us to work across the aisle and come up with common sense solutions. I can tell you what doesn't work. Demonizing people doesn't work. Making people fear others doesn't work. What we're seeing today, these quotas of 3,000 apprehensions per day, an arbitrary quota determined by Stephen Miller, and seeing people, hardworking immigrants being chased in agricultural fields, overcrowded detention facilities. Through reconciliation, putting all of that on steroids, using DOD funding to put it even more on steroids, we all need to work together on this issue. If we can come up with narrow, targeted solutions for agriculture, that means we can do this in a broader way. So I rise to urge my colleagues, especially in this markup today, for us to hear one another, not demonize one another, and not demonize the people that this bill will impact. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank the gentlelady. Before I recognize are there any other members who wish to address the en bloc amendment? Seeing none, before I turn to Dr. Harris to close, I feel incumbent to say, as a former chairman of the Rules Committee, those of you that have an interest in this need to be talking to the Committee of Jurisdiction, Judiciary, and need to be talking to the Rules Committee, because they do have the ability to come in and challenge this particular measure. So if you have an interest, don't think we can just solve it here. You've got to go talk to the folks on Judiciary and particularly on the Rules Committee. So just a piece of free advice. With that, I yield to Dr. Harris, 1 minute to close.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. We certainly will be discussing this before this comes before the whole body. And as the chairman of the subcommittee indicates, this is to make sure this discussion occurs and that some movement forward is made, because we're at a critical juncture with our workers in the country. And again, as we begin the process of returning some workers to their homeland, we're going to need some workers to come in under a strictly monitored system, and that's what this amendment does. So I urge a yes vote.
Questions on the amendment? All those in favor say aye. All those opposed say no. The opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the amendment is adopted. Gentleman from California, Mr. Valadeo, is recognized for an amendment.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk, Valadeo number 1, and I ask unanimous consent that the reading be dispensed with.
Without objection, the reading of the amendment is dispensed with. The gentleman is recognized for remarks on his amendment.
Thank you, Chairman, and I know we've had a dialogue on this for a while, but one more round. I think it's important because it's such an important topic for us. I'm in full support of the administration's policies to secure our borders, improve the integrity of our immigration system, and remove dangerous criminals. However, the fact remains that over the last 25 years, a significant number of undocumented immigrants in the United States have been working in our fields and food processing facilities and playing an essential role in bringing food to our tables. Agriculture is a $50 billion industry in California alone and the backbone of my local economy. Central Valley produces over 300 specialty crops and is the largest provider of fresh fruits and vegetables for the nation, so I understand the issue firsthand. For decades, Congress has been unable to provide a long-term fix for our immigration system, and our inability to address this situation has led to a crisis for the agriculture industry. I've consistently heard from producers across the country already struggling with the lack of a reliable workforce that any additional strain will lead to crops rotting the field and empty shelves at the grocery store. Without protections for the current agriculture workforce, we are putting our food security and our economic stability of our rural communities at risk. My amendment directs the Secretary of Homeland Security to exercise existing authority to provide temporary parole in place and work authority for undocumented individuals currently working in the agriculture sector. This temporary solution would help stabilize our agriculture workforce, provide essential protections for farm workers, and offer much-needed certainty for producers as Congress continues working toward a permanent solution. I want to thank the chairman and the committee for the time to address this critical issue impacting our farmers, ranchers, and producers across the country. And I heard a lot of dialogue in the room, and I know there's a lot of support for some sort of solution. I really hope that we get to that point. But with this amendment, I'm going to withdraw it, and I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. The gentlelady from Connecticut, the ranking member of the full committee, Ms. Delores, recognized for the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chair, I have an amendment at the desk, and I ask unanimous consent that the reading of the amendment be dispensed with.
Without objection, the reading of the amendment is dispensed with, and the gentlelady is recognized for remarks on her amendment.
This amendment restores the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities Program, or BRIC, an incredibly popular and effective tool for state and local governments to help prevent the very damage and destruction FEMA responds to after disasters strike. And the president is not labor-focused on the cost of living crisis or on protecting families from disasters. he is actually attacking programs created by the Congress to help, like BRIC, which helps protect our communities from future damage and prevents families from losing everything to a storm, to floods, and to fires in the first place. It's hard to call this program, created in President Trump's first term, wasteful, when research has shown mitigation efforts like BRIC save a minimum of $6 for every dollar invested, and that savings more than doubles when including economic relief. Let us look at some examples of how 2023 BRIC awards are preventing future damage, saving taxpayer money. In central Louisiana, a BRIC-funded drainage project was awarded to reduce flood risk by widening a creek and using infrastructure features to improve water flow, lowering 10-year flood levels by up to 5 inches across 500 acres, benefiting 119 structures, including 106 homes. In Edinburgh, Texas, BRIC funds were awarded to help build a regional stormwater detention facility and ditch extension to reduce the depth of flooding and protect 90 structures from extreme precipitation events. And in Columbus, Nebraska, BRIC funds were awarded to help reduce the risk of long-term power outages that could cause heat loss in homes during cold weather storms, including rebuilding 3.5 miles of distribution circuit and building a new 24-mile underbuilt distribution line. These are states and communities that depend on my colleagues across the aisle to advocate for their needs. In fact, many of my Republican colleagues here today on this subcommittee pleaded with the Secretary to restore the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities program because they know how important this initiative is to their states. Make no mistake, from housing to education to healthcare to disaster recovery, not one of our states can afford to take on the burden of everything this administration seeks to shift upon them. Everyone in this room knows that. These cuts are not just numbers on a page, and they are not only felt in Washington, D.C. They affect all of our constituents. In the last year, Connecticut has been devastated by wildfires, historic flooding, and damaging storms. In my district alone, the cancellation of this program has jeopardized nearly $25 million that New Haven was awarded to protect our downtown against damage from flooding as we face increasingly serious storms. It's not right that my constituents or other constituents are left out on their own to fend off increasing natural disasters, and we should be opposed to that. We have to restore this funding. And I urge my colleagues to support this amendment, and I yield back.
Thank the gentlelady. The chairman of the subcommittee, Mr. Amodei, is recognized to respond to the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The BRIC program was established by Congress and signed into law by President with bipartisan support during his first term. It was originally intended to improve disaster mitigation efforts and decrease the costs associated with federal disaster relief. However, the last administration shifted the program outside its intended scope to incorporate climate change and equity-based priorities. I understand the new administration's efforts to review past BRIC awards to ensure they're legitimate. However, I take issue with the Secretary directing FEMA to unilaterally cancel the program. I would prefer the department identify and implement necessary reforms without foregoing investments critical to communities across the country to prepare for and recover from natural disasters. While the gentlelady's amendment requires the administration to administer the BRIC program, it doesn't address the waste and abuse seen under the Biden administration. Therefore, I will be offering a second-degree amendment to restore the program to its intended scope. I yield back.
Gentlelady from Illinois is recognized to address the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The BRIC program directly supports strengthening communities across all 50 states and U.S. territories by improving disaster mitigation ahead of devastating weather events. The Trump administration canceled this program earlier this year, And however, Ms. DeLauro's amendment would reverse that action. I think both sides of the aisle can agree on how beneficial this program is to the long-term investment in our communities, especially for those of us who have faced a disaster. If you want to continue to use taxpayer money to pay for multiple reconstruction of the same destruction as the price to build only goes up, then go ahead and vote no on this amendment. But if you want to use taxpayer money wisely and help districts across the country properly prepare for future devastation and avoid multiple rebuilds, then this should be an easy yes vote, in line with the chairman of the full committee's views that this program is essential for proper preparation and can lead to saving taxpayer money. As he said, this isn't a partisan issue. It's one that concerns states regardless of politics. I urge my colleagues to support Ms. DeLauro's amendment and reject the secondary amendment. I yield back.
Thank the gentlelady. Gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Wasserman Schultz, recognized to address the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise in support of the ranking member's amendment, which would reinstate the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities program, also known as BRIC. The BRIC program is one of the most cost-effective tools in our toolbox to assist state and local governments with resources before a disaster strikes. This program was created in a bipartisan fashion through the Disaster Recovery Reform Act of 2018. At the time, both parties recognized a fundamental truth. The best way to protect lives and save taxpayer dollars is to prepare before disaster strikes, not just respond afterwards. And that has worked. For every dollar we invest in pre-disaster mitigation, we save $6 to $13 in avoided damage, disaster response, and economic disruption. That's not a partisan talking point. That's the data from the National Institute of Building Sciences and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. You might say the program is inefficient or duplicative. Let me tell you what's inefficient. Paying to rebuild the school 3 times because we never invested in flood-proofing it the first time. Let me tell you what's duplicative. Spending billions on emergency aid while gutting the programs that would have made that aid unnecessary. The hurricanes that devastated Florida in recent years, from Helene, Milton, Ian to Michael, they weren't one-offs. They're our new normal. And canceling BRIC in the face of that reality is not just misguided, it's reckless. It will leave our coastal towns, our rural communities, our seniors, our children more vulnerable when the next storm hits. And we all know it will. These grants fund stormwater systems in flood-prone towns. They fund fire breaks in wildfire zones. They fund living shorelines and wetland restoration, which not only buffer storm surge, but also preserve our ecosystems and our way of life. Communities desperately need these grants. Demand for BRIC funding has outstripped the available dollars 5 to 1. And now we tell these communities, after years of work, after being selected for awards, after they planned their futures around these very funds, never mind. That is just bad government, and I urge my colleagues to support this amendment, and I yield back.
Thank you, gentlelady. Gentlelady from Maine, Ms. Pingree, is recognized to address the amendment.
Very much, Mr. Chair. I want to thank the ranking member for her amendment and speak in strong support of the BRIC program. As you've heard my colleagues say, this is a thoughtful, cost-effective program which was eliminated one day in April, leaving communities and individuals sort of out in the cold with no understanding of where they were going to go to get the funding for their work. Maine, like many states, has been hit by some very serious storms. If you haven't had one in your state, one is coming soon, but most of you have experienced some level of disaster that your state and local government cannot afford. FEMA comes in and helps out, and as you've heard, one of the most important things is not doing everything exactly the same way you did the last time, so we just spend the same money over and over and over again to rebuild. That is an efficient way to use government funding, and it's a good way to plan and think into the future, and that was the idea of the BRIC program, to help communities to be more resilient to face the future. Now, Maine had 2 back-to-back storms 2 years ago in January, which devastated much of our working waterfront. About 50% of our wharves and coastal communities had some level of damage, and some of it was gone completely. These were fishing wharves that belonged to families for a long time. These were breakwaters and wharfs that belonged to communities. These were extremely expensive things to repair. Many of these communities over time have qualified for BRIC grants. And the value of them is it allows the community to think ahead and say, what's going to happen when the next storm hits? Why should we build this somewhat differently? What kind of way can we restructure our waterfront or our wharf that is vital to our community for transportation, for economic uses, for our commercial fishermen, for our recreational boaters? The only way you can get in and out in many communities is by water. And you have to rebuild them in a way that withstands what's going to happen in the future. That's what being resilient is, and that's what these grants are. Now, one of the arguments the administration made was this was too woke. We were talking about climate change, and that's a misuse of the program. Well, whether or not you want to believe that climate change exists, sea level rise is happening, and it's happening in all of our coastal communities. These storm surges that come with our winter storms now are so severe that one building in my town was flooded up to people's waist. People had never seen flooding like this that we had 2 years ago, and the building was almost washed away after being there for more than 100 years. Well, if a community like mine or other coastal communities doesn't plan ahead and try to be more resilient, and whether you call it climate change or you call it sea level rise or extreme source surge or extreme weather, it doesn't matter. It's what we're going to face in the future, and that's what resilience is. That's what thinking into the future is. And if this government can't gird itself to think into the future and spend the taxpayers' dollars in such a way to make sure we're planning for that, then we are truly waste, fraud, and abuse right here in this committee. We are wasting our taxpayer dollars. So this has been a wonderful program. It was shocking to our communities when they got that call in April. Nobody ever expected a FEMA grant to suddenly be dropped overnight. Grants that people had already been doing the planning and having meetings and thinking ahead were suddenly disappeared. And there aren't a lot of other sources for this money. So I urge the committee to put this back. I urge this funding to be reinstated, and I urge us all to spend the taxpayer dollars a little more wisely, and I yield back.
Thank you, gentlelady. Does anybody else wish to address the amendment? Seeing none, there is at the desk an amendment in the second degree to the amendment. It's offered by Mr. Amadei, who's recognized to explain his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have an amendment at the desk and ask for unanimous consent to dispose of with the reading of the amendment.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, speaking only from my observations from the debate so far, it doesn't sound like there's much disagreement amongst the committee on whether or not the BRIC program ought to go forward. So I'm not going to talk much about that. If somebody thinks I deprived them from something, please let me know, but I'm guessing you didn't. The gentlelady's amendment makes BRIC program mandatory and endorses the statute as is. My amendment would ensure that the BRIC projects are related to mitigating hazards posed by potential major disasters similar to events that have occurred in a state or locality over the previous 4 years. This ensures we aren't spending millions of dollars on shaded bus stops, planting of trees, whatever. My amendment would, so it shortens it from 7 to 4. My amendment would also adjust the scope of eligibility requirement to ensure BRIC grants are used for, we've heard this word in the discussion so far, infrastructure. They are grants used for infrastructure projects and not, for example, COVID-19 related purposes, by shortening the eligibility window for states with major disaster declarations from within the past 7 to the last 4 years. My amendment would also strike a catch-all provision that provides overly broad discretion, which we think was abused by the previous administration. You're going, well, what is it? What it is language that says, oh, and by the way, anything else the president, in consultation with the states, deems appropriate. That's pretty broad language, ladies and gentlemen. Anything they deem appropriate. And so it would strike that language from the program if it goes forward, if this was adopted. Accordingly, 7 years to 4, not anything deemed appropriate. I urge my colleagues to support my second degree amendment, and I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. The gentlelady from Connecticut, Ms. DeLauro, is recognized to address the amendment in the second degree.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This second-degree amendment changes the following. Requires mitigation efforts to be tied to a major disaster declaration from the past 4 years. Currently, the BRIC program does not have any requirement of this nature. Changes eligibility from 7 years to 4 years. A state or tribe must have had a major disaster declaration within the last 4 years to be eligible to apply for BRIC funding. For fiscal year 2026, this rules out Maryland, Delaware, Wisconsin, and the District of Columbia. Strikes the, quote, catch-all clause in the eligibility section that currently allows the president, with broad flexibility, quote, such other criteria as the president establishes in consultation with state and local governments, end quote. I rise in opposition to the second-degree amendment, which limits the number of states that can receive BRIC funds and limits the eligible use of awards. Under current law, states that have had a major disaster declaration in the last 7 years are eligible for BRIC awards, which are flexible dollars to mitigate against future disasters. The second-degree amendment would reduce the number of states that are eligible by lowering the window from 7 years to 4 years. It would also restrict how the funds could be spent, preventing communities. We want to put emphasis on the states having a say in all of this. Preventing communities from prioritizing programs that would save the most taxpayer dollars. If the second-degree amendment were adopted, Delaware, Maryland, and Wisconsin, District of Columbia would be ineligible to receive 2026 funds. I'm very glad to see the bipartisan support for reinstating BRIC after President Trump decided to gut this program, which has demonstrated its success in multiple occasions, as I laid out in my opening statement. However, there is no reason to exclude communities in these 3 states and the District of Columbia. Maryland, it's the mobile home severe damage mitigation, sludge management, sustainability, and resiliency, Southern Crisfield flood mitigation project. My colleagues across the aisle have consistently tried to deny funding to the District of Columbia. But this would also disadvantage states who have also suffered disasters in the last 7 years, including severe tornadoes in Wisconsin in 2019, Tropical Storm Isaias in Maryland and Delaware in 2020. I oppose the second-degree amendment, and I yield back. And I might add, if I can, I did yield back, I'm sorry, just for 1 second. I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. FY23, Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities. This is really extraordinary. Just about every state in the nation has several projects that have been included in the BRIC program, and amounting to $882.6 million in federal costs, 656 sub-applications, selected 94 communities and tribal nations for BRIC direct technical assistance. This program works, and it has been effective for every state, for every Democrat, Republican, Independent, Native American, whoever it is, it works. Why are we doing this? I oppose this second-degree amendment, and I do yield back this time, Mr. Chairman.
All right, I thank the gentlelady for remarks. Gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Edwards, recognized to address the second-degree amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. When Hurricane Helene devastated Western North Carolina, we realized that we don't just need recovery, we need resilience. The Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities program, also known as BRIC, helps communities like mine build stronger roads, upgrade stormwater systems, and hardened infrastructure so they're not wiped out by the next storm. I think we've all established of the program. But without this program, many communities across the country do not have the resources that they need to fund their own resilience projects, making for a more vulnerable America. When BRIC was canceled, North Carolina alone saw roughly $196 million in projects get rescinded. That's nearly $200 million in shovel-ready resilience wiped away in the middle of one of our state's worst natural disasters. Earlier this year, President Trump asked me to sit on a task force to offer suggestions on how to accelerate the recovery of Western North Carolina, and I produced this 101-page report. Included in it is the fact that we not only need a brick, but, Mr. Chairman, we need a brick that is restructured. I'll tell you the latitude that's taken by allowing the president to have such an influence on this. In 2023, 3 states received 50% of the brick funding. 2 of those were California and New York, surprisingly. And so, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate your secondary amendment. And this year, please know that I led a bipartisan, bicameral letter with 85 colleagues urging the administration to reinstate BRIC immediately. And I even included, as I mentioned, that suggestion to the president. Rebuilding isn't enough. We need to rebuild stronger. Strengthening BRIC, not taking it away, is essential to the long-term recovery of Western North Carolina and similar communities nationwide. And it clearly needs restructuring. I believe your secondary amendment takes bold steps to do that. I appreciate it coming forward, and I urge everyone to support it. Thank you.
Thank the gentleman. The gentlelady from Illinois, Ms. Underwood, is recognized to address the second.
No, I don't have anything.
You okay? Okay. The gentleman from Maryland is recognized to address the second-degree amendment.
As you heard, and as I understand, I had another meeting, so I was late coming into this debate, but Maryland obviously is one of the states that's exempted from eligibility. One of 4 jurisdictions, one of which is the District of Columbia, apparently on the rationale that Maryland has not had a disaster, which from our standpoint is obviously good. On the other hand, we're a vulnerable state. We're on the Atlantic coast. We have the Chesapeake Bay. We are subject to flooding. And we would be very concerned if next week we had a major disaster, but we're not eligible for funds until 27. Is that my understanding of the, if that's my understanding of the amendment, that does not seem to be fair at all to us. Let me tell you, when Mr. McCarthy and I were both number 2s in our party, we went down to Puerto Rico after their hurricane, and we saw the devastation, and we visited the Keys. And we viewed 2 structures, sort of condos. One had been built prior to Florida's own code increase in building requirements. The other had been built after. They were both done by the same builder and essentially the same structures, except one was built to the Florida code after a previous hurricane. The one that had been built after code essentially had windows broken out, but was fine. The other was essentially 80% destroyed. We came back to Congress and we amended the law, co-sponsored a bill, amended the law so that you had to build to resilient, not to what was. The law at that point was you rebuilt to what was, and that's what you were reimbursed for. Made no sense because you didn't want it to happen again, so you wanted to build to resiliency requirements. So I'm very strongly for the brick, but would be a little bit confounded as to why 4 states are picked on, other than perhaps to save money. Well, I understand that, but if you have a disaster in 3 states, it's going to cost you more than if you have a disaster in only 1. But the need in both is keen, and seems to me it would be responsible that we make sure that all are eligible. If we haven't had one recently and don't fall in that category, hopefully we'll stay there, so it won't cost any money. But if it doesn't, and some act of God or natural disaster, not necessarily an act of God, but natural disaster happens, it seems to me that it's unfair to make us ineligible because we haven't been hurt before.
I thank the gentleman. Do any other members seek recognition to speak on the second-degree amendment? Seeing none, Mr. Amadei is recognized for 1 minute to close.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So let's recap. Nobody's opposed to the BRIC program. So that's off the table here. I think we all support that. The question is, do we shorten 7 years to 4 years? And do we get rid of the language that says anything else appropriate, basically? That's the status quo. And so if you like the status quo, and obviously that's fine. Could I not have the editorial, please? I know you're going to vote against me on this. I'm just guessing. But anyhow, as we go forward, reinstate the program by all means. Nobody came up with a different, I don't know, 5 years is met. It's got to be 7. Now, mind you, if there's a Chesapeake Bay disaster next week, you're fully eligible. And let's not forget about other FEMA sources of funding that is eligible for disasters, but we won't talk about that. So, the rule going forward when we reinstate a program that everybody likes is you got a 4-year window after a major disaster declaration. And the rule going forward is anything else that the president in consultation with the localities deem appropriate. I'm sorry, I think that was abused under the previous administration, and so that needs to go away. In my opinion, that's the biggest chunk of the secondary amendment. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. The question's now on the second-degree amendment offered by Mr. Amadei. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. No. The opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. Roll call has been requested. Roll call. Sufficient support for the roll call. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Adderholt. Aye. Mr. Adderholt, aye. Mr. Aguilar. No. Mr. Aguilar, no. Mr. Alford. Aye. Mr. Alford, aye. Mr. Amadei. Yes. Mr. Amadei, aye. Mrs. Bice. Yes. Mrs. Bice, aye. Mr. Bishop. No. Mr. Bishop, no. Mr. Calvert. Aye. Mr. Calvert, aye. Mr. Carter. Mr. Case. No. Mr. Case, no. Mr. Siscamani. Mr. Klein. Aye. Mr. Klein, aye. Mr. Cloud. Mr. Clyburn. Mr. Clyburn, no. Mr. Clyde. Aye. Mr. Clyde, aye. Mr. Cole. Aye. Mr. Cole, aye. Mr. Cuellar. Mr. Cuellar, no. Miss Dean. Miss Dean, no. Mr. Loro. No. Mr. Loro, no. Mr. Diaz-Balart. Mr. Diaz-Balart, aye. Mr. Edwards. Aye. Mr. Edwards, aye. Mr. Elzey. Mr. Elzey, aye. Ms. Escobar. Mr. Espaillat. No. Mr. Espaillat, no. Mr. Fleischman. Mr. Fleischman, aye. Ms. Frankel. Ms. Frankel, no. Mr. Franklin. Mr. Franklin, aye. Mr. Gonzalez. Mr. Gonzalez, aye. Mr. Guest. Mr. Guest, aye. Mr. Harder. Dr. Harris. Dr. Harris, aye. Mrs. Hinson. Mrs. Hinson, aye. Mr. Hoyer. Mr. Hoyer, no. Mr. Ivy. Mr. Ivy, no. Mr. Joyce. Mr. Joyce, aye. Ms. Captor. Ms. Captor, no. Mr. Lalota. Mr. Lalota. Mr. Lalota, aye. Ms. Lee. Ms. Lee, no. Ms. Letlow. Ms. Letlow, aye. Mr. Levin. Mr. Levin, no. Ms. Malloy. Ms. Malloy, aye. Ms. McCollum. Ms. McCollum, no. Ms. Ming. Ms. Ming, no. Mr. Molinar. Mr. Molinar, aye. Mr. Moore. Mr. Moore, aye. Mr. Morelli. No. Mr. Morelli, no. Mr. Mervan. No. Mr. Mervan, no. Mr. Newhouse. Aye. Mr. Newhouse, aye. Ms. Perez. Ms. Pingree. No. Ms. Pingree, no. Mr. Pocan. No. Mr. Pocan, no. Mr. Quigley. No. Mr. Quigley, no. Mr. Reschenthaler. Mr. Rogers. Aye. Mr. Rogers, aye. Mr. Rutherford. Mr. Rutherford, aye. Mr. Simpson. Aye. Mr. Simpson, aye. Mr. Strong. Aye. Mr. Strong, aye. Mrs. Torres. No. Mrs. Torres, no. Miss Underwood. No. Miss Underwood, no. Mr. Valadeo. Miss Wasserman Schultz. Mrs. Watson Coleman. Mrs. Watson Coleman? Mrs. Watson Coleman, no. Mr. Womack? Mr. Womack, aye. Mr. Zinke? Mr. Zinke, aye.
Does any member wish to record their vote or change their vote? Gentleman from California? Gentleman from
Mr.
Arizona?
Valadeo, aye.
Gentlelady
Mr. Siscomani, aye.
Washington? Gentlelady from Florida?
Perez, did you vote no?
Gentleman from
Mr.
California?
Wasserman Schultz, no.
Gentleman from Pennsylvania?
Mr. Harder, no.
Are there any others wishing to
Mr.
record or
Reschenthaler,
change
aye.
their vote? Seeing none, the clerk will tally. On this vote, the ayes are 33, the noes are 27. The amendment in the second degree is adopted. We'll now return to the amendment offered by Ms. Delora as amended. If there's no further debate, the gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute to close.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's been said April 4th, 2025, FEMA announced the cancellation of the BRIC program while citing no authority to do so. $4 billion in funding from projects that were already awarded around the country. I might add, for those who voted yes, in North Carolina, you got 8 projects from the BRIC program. I've got down at least 2 for Oklahoma. In Louisiana, you got 5 programs. Somebody talked about California getting more, in New York. California got 5, Louisiana got 5. This has been a program that has worked like a charm for people who find themselves in a difficult spot after a disaster. I don't understand the rationale for excluding 4 states. I guess once you got yours, you don't care about, several others that ought to have the same opportunity to do this. But, and both, I will just say this, both Chairman Cole and I really pleaded with the Secretary. We made the case to not really end this program. We both did this together. So it's a good program. I don't understand the leaving out of 3 states in the District of Columbia. This is like a random notion. They said, oh, how can we, get ourselves back on track here on the BRIC program, because it has helped, so we need to change it in some way. Let's exclude these 3 states and the District of Columbia. No rationale, no criteria, nothing but a whim. If but the body has voted, so be it. And I will just say this as we conclude, that I oppose the second-degree amendment, as you know, but I will just say that it really is preferable to where we are today, after the President of the United States inexplicably canceled all BRIC awards, and will live to fight another day. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank the gentlelady. The question is now on the amendment offered by Ms. DeLauro as amended. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the amendment as amended is adopted.
Okay.
Gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Clyde, is recognized for an amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have an amendment at the desk, and I ask unanimous consent that the clerk dispense with the reading.
Without objection, the reading of the amendment is dispensed with, and the gentleman is recognized for remarks on his amendment.
Thank you. Today, I'm offering an amendment to reduce the funding for the Department of Homeland Security Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA, to the fiscal year 26 President's budget request level of $1.95 billion, $280 million less than the committee mark. I think the President's budget request is fiscally correct. I believe this cut is necessary to rein in the waste, abuse, and mission drift and political weaponization, that plagued CISA under the Biden-Harris administration, as well as to return the agency to its core mission. I'm grateful that on day one, President Trump acted to defend America's First Amendment rights by issuing Executive Order 14149, restoring freedom of speech and ending federal censorship, which bars federal agencies from pressuring social media companies to censor lawful speech. It reaffirmed a basic truth. Government has no role in controlling America's free speech, including online expression. CISA was originally created with bipartisan support to protect our nation's critical infrastructure from physical and cyber threats. Yet under the Biden-Harris administration, the agency became weaponized to focus on Americans' speech. For example, in 2021, CISA renamed the Countering Foreign Influence Task Force to the Mis, Dis, and Malinformation, or MDM team, dropping the word foreign entirely, an alarming pivot toward domestic speech policing. CISA also participated in the now-defunct Disinformation Governance Board, a failed effort to monitor and censor Americans' speech. While the board was shut down following public outcry, CISA's censorship efforts continued. A 2022 report revealed CISA's plans to target so-called inaccurate information on issues such as the origins of COVID-19 pandemic and the efficacy of the COVID-19 vaccines, the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan, and U.S. support for Ukraine, topics all central to the public debate. Additionally, the Twitter files revealed how CISA actively shaped online discourse by working through third parties, engaging in what amounts to be government by proxy censorship. Of course, this activity expanded beyond Twitter. There was a formalized process involving a special Facebook portal for government officials to flag Americans' content to Facebook or Instagram, with requests that such content be suppressed or throttled. These actions represented a direct and serious threat to our First Amendment freedoms by CISA. These concerns were confirmed by the House Select Subcommittee on the Weaponization of the Federal Government. Its report, The Weaponization of CISA, documented CISA's coordination with other agencies and nonprofits to suppress speech while avoiding the appearance of propaganda, an egregious abuse of taxpayer resources and public trust. Thankfully, the President's FY26 budget request acknowledges these concerns by proposing a $491 million cut to CISA, eliminating its censorship-related efforts and restoring focus on core missions like federal network defense and critical infrastructure protection. The request notes that, quote, CISA was more focused on censorship than on protecting the nation's critical systems. The President's budget request is certainly enough funding to properly accomplish their mission. With our country now at $37 trillion in debt and spending over $1 trillion in interest to service that debt, more spent on interest payments every year than what we spend on the entire Department of Defense, the spending must be held in check. Again, my amendment matches the President's budget request and ensures CISA's funding supports its actual mission, not partisan efforts to suppress free expression. I urge all members to support this amendment and help restore CISA to its original purpose while protecting the constitutional rights of every American. Thank you. Mr. Chairman? Mr. Chairman?
I'm sorry.
Mr. Chairman, I withdraw in committee and reserve to offer on the floor, and I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. With that, then we'll move on. The gentlelady from Illinois, Ms. Underwood, is recognized for an amendment.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk, Underwood number 2.
Without
I
ob-
request unanimous consent to skip the reading.
Thank you, gentlelady. Without objection, the reading the amendment is dispensed with, and the gentlelady is recognized for remarks on her amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This simple amendment carries forward language that helps ensure Congress can fulfill our Article I responsibilities under the Constitution to conduct oversight of how taxpayer dollars are spent on immigration enforcement. This language helps keep our country safe and ensures that as representatives, we can serve our communities with the transparency, accessibility, and accountability that they deserve. I urge my colleagues to support this amendment, and I yield back.
I now recognize myself as the acting chairman of the committee. So anybody wants to leave, now would be a good time. First of all, I want to compliment my colleague, the ranking member of the committee, for offering her amendment and not pansying out like the previous speaker. Hats off. Second of all, I accept the amendment. I yield back.
So you're moderating,
What?
There are others who might want to speak.
Others might want to speak. You're doing the script.
We accepted the amendments. Anybody want to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory? Are there other members wishing to speak on the amendment?
Okay.
Then the gentlelady from Illinois is recognized to close.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate your partnership in preserving our Article I oversight responsibilities, and I yield back.
Okay, the question is on the amendment offered by the gentlelady from Illinois. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Would all those in favor please say aye? Aye. Better. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the amendment is adopted. The recorded vote is not requested. Mr. Bishop. Mr. Bishop is recognized for an amendment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I do have an amendment at the desk, and I ask unanimous consent to dispense with the reading.
Without objection, the reading of the amendment is dispensed with. The member is recognized for remarks on his amendment.
Thank you, and I rise to offer an amendment to the bill that would fully restore the funding to the Office for Civil Rights and Civil Liberties to the FY25 enacted level. The United States of America exists on the bedrock principles that every person is entitled to and must be treated fairly, equally under the law, must have due process, and must be treated as innocent until proven guilty. The bill before us fails to achieve the delicate balance of keeping our country safe without sacrificing the civil liberties of the American people. It siphons off funds from the Office for Civil Rights, Customs and Border Patrol, cybersecurity, and federal assistance to increase ICE funding by nearly $1 billion. Now, whether you agree that ICE should get $1 billion in new funding or not, We as members of Congress have a duty to protect the civil rights and the civil liberties of every person in America. Because when one person has his or her constitutional rights violated, every American citizen's rights are put at risk. The bill before us eliminates over $37 million from the Office for Civil Rights and Civil Liberties, leaving the office with a mere $4.9 million, a 90% cut to investigate what I expect could be hundreds of new complaints of civil rights and constitutional violations by an increasing number of individuals who are now going to be interacting with immigration officials. In March, the Trump administration announced that the Department of Homeland Security would be cutting funding to several oversight and watchdog offices, consolidating their functions and eliminating job positions. Shamefully, the DHS spokesperson justified the changes by saying that watchdog offices like the Office of Immigration Detention Ombudsman and the Office for Civil Rights and Civil Liberties obstruct immigration enforcement at the department. But in many cases, the department has wrongfully weaponized immigration enforcement resources against lawful residents and even United States citizens, sometimes detaining people based solely on their race, ethnicity, or dialect. A few weeks ago, one of my constituents in Southwest Georgia, who is a U.S. citizen of Mexican heritage, was wrongfully detained by Florida state troopers for illegally entering Florida under state immigration law. ICE then put a 48-hour detainer on the 20-year-old, even after a judge viewed his birth certificate and dropped the charge. This is just one story of an American citizen who got swept up in an immigration case, but it won't be the last. If the committee ultimately decides to pass this bill with increased immigration enforcement, we will definitely need adequate funding so that cases like this receive proper attention and an independent investigation. A vote for this amendment helps ensure that the Office for Civil Rights and Civil Liberties has the resources it needs to fully investigate alleged civil rights and constitutional violations at the department. I ask you to vote yes to help protect the civil rights of all Americans. I thank you, and I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. The chairman of the subcommittee is recognized to respond to the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Office for Civil Rights and Civil Liberties has limited responsibility in statute. Over the last few years, what was once a relatively small office grew into a $43 million organization that did far more than what the law authorized. Earlier this year, the administration reduced the scope of this office back to the original authorized functions. The action reduced the workforce of 135 down to just 4 full-time positions. As appropriators, we have a responsibility to only fund positions that are actually filled or likely to be filled in the coming year. The fact of the matter is that moving forward, the work of the CRCL office will largely be done by contractors rather than federal workers, maintaining many of the functions while reducing the cost. I would also like to point out that if we do pass this and put that money into this agency with 4 workers, it is my personal opinion, you're just creating a target for a reprogramming request for the administration. And I would submit to you that when we're talking about doing our jobs, that providing money that's already been appropriated for expenses that aren't going to occur is handing that over to the administration in a reprogramming request. And so, with all respect to my colleague from Georgia, I ask my colleagues to oppose this amendment, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank the gentleman. The gentlelady from Illinois, Ms. Underwood, is recognized to respond to the amendment.
Mr. Chairman, I rise in strong support of this amendment. This amendment would utilize funding from within the Office of the Secretary and Executive Management to restore the Office of Civil Rights and Civil Liberties, or CRCL, at DHS, an office mandated by law within the Homeland Security Act. CRCL has a critical role in oversight and management of cases involving possible violations of civil rights and liberties for DHS employees and anyone the Department of Homeland Security interacts with. They're charged with ensuring DHS complies with civil rights laws like the Americans with Disabilities Act. They're charged with protecting religious freedoms while maintaining high-quality screening at TSA. They're charged with protecting Americans' privacy when it comes to identity verification. But earlier this year, the administration made the decision to gut this office down to just 4 people. And now they're contracting out the functions of this office to keep up with the workload. And now the bill that we're discussing today cuts the office by nearly 90%. I've not yet heard from anyone from the administration or my colleagues across the aisle with a credible explanation of how the Department of Homeland Security can possibly meet the statutory mandates. We heard the chairman mention statutory mandates. And how are they supposed to do that and preserve individual liberty, fairness, and equality under the law with 4 staff and a 90% cut? It just doesn't work. That's why we need this amendment, which would restore the office and ensure the Department of Homeland Security follows its congressional mandate. And I urge my colleagues to support it. I yield back.
Thank the gentlelady. Are there other members wishing to address the amendment? Seeing none, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute to close.
Chairman, this amendment would simply provide level funding for the Office of Civil Rights and Civil Liberties so that they can continue investigating civil rights violations amid what we can expect to be a dramatic increase in immigration enforcement. Every day, law-abiding American citizens are being wrongly swept up in the administration's mass deportation activities, and it is our job to make sure the Department of Homeland Security is doing its dead-level best to treat every human being with whom it interacts, whether they be undocumented, legal, or a U.S. citizen, with the dignity and fairness that our Constitution demands. This bill, as it currently is written, attempts to allow the department to sweep civil and constitutional rights violations under the rug, sending the dangerous message that officials may act with a sense of impunity as they enter our schools, churches, businesses, and public buildings. This amendment lays 2 options before us. Either we vote to help protect the civil rights and civil liberties of all Americans, or we relinquish our freedoms and submit to the arbitrary will of the executive. I urge my colleagues to vote yes on this amendment, and with that, I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. The question is now on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Georgia. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. No. The opinion of the chair, the noes have it. Roll call vote has been requested. Sufficient support has been shown. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Adderholt. Mr. Aguilar. Mr. Aguilar, aye. Mr. Alford. Mr. Amadei. No. Mr. Amadei, no. Mrs. Bice. Mr. Bishop. Aye. Mr. Bishop, aye. Mr. Calvert. Mr. Carter. Mr. Case. Mr. Case. Mr. Case, aye. Mr. Siscamani. Mr. Siscamani, no. Mr. Klein. Mr. Klein, no. Mr. Cloud. Mr. Clyburn. Mr. Clyde. Negative. Mr. Clyde, no. Mr. Cole.
No.
Mr. Cole, no. Mr. Cuellar. Ms. Dean. Ms. Dean, aye. Ms. DeLauro. Ms. DeLauro, aye. Mr. Diaz-Balart. Mr. Edwards. Mr. Elzey. Mr. Elzey, no. Ms. Escobar. Ms. Escobar, aye. Mr. Espaillat. Mr. Espaillat, aye. Mr. Fleischman. Mr. Fleischman, no. Ms. Frankel. Mr. Franklin. Mr. Franklin, no. Mr. Gonzalez. Mr. Guest. Mr. Guest, no. Mr. Harder? Mr. Harder, aye. Dr. Harris? Dr. Harris, no. Mrs. Hinson? Mrs. Hinson, no. Mr. Hoyer? Mr. Hoyer, aye. Mr. Ivy? Mr. Joyce? Ms. Capter? Ms. Capter, aye. Mr. LaLota? Mr. LaLota, no. Ms. Lee? Ms. Lee, no. Ms. Letlow? Ms. Letlow, no. Mr. Levin? Mr. Levin, aye. Ms. Malloy? Ms. Malloy, no. Ms. McCullum? Ms. McCullum, aye. Ms. Ming? Ms. Ming, aye. Mr. Molinar? Mr. Molinar, no. Mr. Moore? Mr. Moore, no. Mr. Morelli? Mr. Mervan? Mr. Mervan, no. Mr. Newhouse? Mr. Newhouse, no. Ms. Perez? Ms. Perez, aye. Ms. Pingree? Ms. Pingree, aye. Mr. Pocan? Mr. Pocan, aye. Mr. Quigley? Mr. Quigley, aye. Mr. Reschenthaler? Mr. Rogers? Mr. Rogers, no. Mr. Rutherford? Mr. Rutherford, no. Mr. Simpson? Mr. Simpson, no. Mr. Strong? Mr. Strong, no. Mrs. Torres? Mrs. Torres, aye. Miss Underwood? Miss Underwood, aye. Mr. Valadeo? Mr. Valadeo, no. Miss Wasserman Schultz? Miss Wasserman Schultz, aye. Mrs. Watson Coleman? Mrs. Watson Coleman, aye. Mr. Womack? Mr. Womack, no. Mr. Zinke? Mr. Zinke, no.
Does any member wish to record their vote or change their vote? I think, gentleman from Texas,
Mr. Gonzalez votes no.
gentlelady from Oklahoma,
Mrs. Bice, no.
the gentleman from Ohio,
Mr. Joyce, no.
gentleman from Alabama,
Mr. Adderholt, no.
the gentleman from North Carolina,
Mr. Edwards, no.
the gentlelady from Florida,
Ms. Frankel, aye.
the gentleman from Missouri,
Mr. Alford, no.
the gentleman from California,
Mr. Calvert,
the
no.
gentleman from Texas,
Mr. Carter,
the
no.
gentlelady from Nevada,
Off no on aye, Ms. Lee.
the gentleman from South Carolina,
Mr. Clyburn, aye.
gentleman from Maryland,
Mr. Ivy,
the
aye.
gentleman from Florida,
Mr. Diaz-Balart, no.
the gentleman from Pennsylvania,
Mr. Reschenthaler, no.
the gentleman from Indiana.
Off no on aye, Mr. Mervan.
Gentleman from New York. I do not believe the gentleman is recorded.
Mr. Morelli, aye.
Gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Cuellar, aye.
Okay, are there others wishing to record or change their vote? Seeing none, the clerk will tally. On this vote, the ayes are 28, the noes are 34. The amendment is not adopted. Is there further amendment or discussion? I believe the gentlelady from Minnesota, Ms. McCullum, is recognized for an amendment.
As you know, I have an amendment at the desk, and I ask the reading be dispensed with.
Without objection, the reading of the amendment is dispensed with, and the gentlelady is recognized for remarks on her amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My amendment prohibits the use of funds to detain or deport Afghan nationals who held temporary status protection prior to the end of the program on July 13th, 2025. When the United States was attacked on September 11th in 2001, President Bush, with an authorization from Congress, took military action against al-Qaeda, the Taliban, and Afghanistan. 20 years, the United States maintained a significant military and diplomatic presence in support of the Afghan government. As part of that effort, we asked the people of Afghanistan to trust the United States, to work with us, and to work with them to build a new future for their nation. Over those 20 years, tens of thousands of Afghan soldiers and civilians stood shoulder to shoulder with U.S. troops and diplomats serving in Afghanistan. Many of us, some of us here in this room as members of Congress, we benefited and we were able to do our oversight duties when we were in Afghanistan. We worked with our State Department officials and our troops and their interpreters so our questions could be fully answered. They did this, these interpreters, at great risk to their own lives and at the risk to their families' lives as well. When the United States withdrew from Afghanistan in August of 2021, we evacuated 124 Afghans. We did that because we knew what would happen when the Taliban returned to power. Those Afghans, their families who had assisted U.S. operations, would be subject to vengeful retribution of the Taliban. Not all of those who were evacuated came to the United States, but those that did, they were given the status of temporary protection, and they received that in order to keep themselves safe. It's unfortunate that President Trump has rescinded the temporary protected status for 10,000 Afghans living in the United States. He claims, and I quote, "Permitting the Afghan nationals to remain temporarily in the United States is contrary to the national interests of the United States." I do not believe that is the fact that we should be talking about. What we should be discussing instead is a way to support these individuals, to honor them, those who sacrifice to help keep American personnel. The plans to deport these Afghans back to their country controlled by the Taliban, we know what will happen to them. This is a regime that has cast an entire generation of Afghan women and girls back to the darkness of state-sponsored military. And for the Afghans who will be sent back, especially those young women and girls, it's their worst nightmare. And let's face it, we know how it ends. It will not only cost them their freedoms, but for many of them, it will cost them their lives. So I ask yourself this: are there other things we should be asking the administration to do to help them be able to remain and stay? If we don't want temporary status to exist forever, we have a responsibility to work with the administration to find different venues for them to continue to live here. So ask yourself, if we don't do something about this, work collectively on this, how will other nations in the world view us? Will they see it for what it is, a complete betrayal of allies and partners by the United States? Would anyone trust or volunteer to work for our military so quickly as the Afghans did in the future? So, Mr. Chairman, I believe today we have the opportunity to do the right thing. Let's stand by those Afghans who gave up everything to help our mission in Afghanistan, to keep our service members, our diplomats safe. Let us honor our nation's commitment by keeping them safe. So I ask my colleagues to support my amendment. And with that, Mr. Chair, I yield back to any time remaining.
Thank the gentlelady. The gentleman from Nevada, Mr. Amadei, is recognized to respond to the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise in opposition to the gentlelady's amendment. And while I appreciate that members may have conflicting opinions over the issue, this seems to be another example of the previous administration's chronic exploitation of every authority to allow as many foreigners into the country as possible. The fact of the matter is we were unable to fully vet everyone who came in under this program following the last administration's withdrawal in Afghanistan. Additionally, the Afghan nationals who were employed by or on behalf of the United States government in any capacity were and are eligible for special immigrant visas. The department's job is to assess and balance our homeland security interests amid competing priorities. And if DHS has determined that this program needs to be terminated, then we can have that discussion. And particularly as we're under a heightened threat environment, it is of the utmost importance that we ensure the safety of our fellow American citizens. Temporary status should be just that, temporary. And so, I agree with my colleague from Minnesota. Hey, we need to get back and focus on this and decide what to do with the people who, quite frankly, we shouldn't send home because of the danger she's described. But to continue to do nothing and then basically just keep continuing this is not the answer to the issue. The temporary visa program is still in effect for those folks that helped us. And so if we need to give the DHS or whatever the ability to crank that up again, then fine. But to just say we're going to keep extending this down the road, I don't think is a viable solution. And for that reason, I oppose the amendment.
Thank the gentleman. The gentlelady from Illinois is recognized to respond to the amendment.
Mr. Chairman, I rise in support of this amendment. Earlier this year, the Trump administration unjustly terminated temporary protected status for over 11,000 Afghan nationals. Despite the fact that many of these folks have strong asylum cases, TPS status for Afghans will end on July 14th. But the evidence to support ending it just isn't there. In terminating TPS to Afghan nationals, the Department of Homeland Security claimed that there have been, quote, notable improvements in the security and economic situation such that requiring the return of Afghan nationals to Afghanistan does not pose a threat to their personal safety due to armed conflict or extraordinary and temporary conditions. First of all, when it comes to safety, the Department of Homeland Security should consult the State Department, whose current advice is do not travel to Afghanistan. Second, the Department of Homeland Security should consult some Afghan women. According to Human Rights Watch, the situation for women in Afghanistan since the Taliban regained control is, quote, the world's most serious women's rights crisis. This is not a hard vote. We know exactly what conditions we will be sending these people back to. Cutting off their TPS now with little time to prepare puts 10,000 people needlessly at risk. I support this amendment and I urge my colleagues to do the same, and I yield back.
Thank the gentlelady. The gentlelady from Connecticut is recognized to address the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise in support of this amendment, which is essential to America's credibility and to our national character. This amendment prevents funds from being used to detain or deport Afghan holders of temporary protected status. TPS was established by the Congress on a bipartisan basis in 1990 to allow migrants from designated countries to reside here legally for up to 18 months, eligible for employment and travel. This program is not a path to permanent residency or a guarantee of citizenship. TPS recipients still need to apply for those statuses separately. It was used for the first time in 1990 to protect Salvadorans fleeing civil war and follows an international tradition of extending shelter to those who are fleeing conflict. Europe offered temporary protection to refugees from the Balkans in the early 1990s, and Turkey offered the same to Syrians fleeing civil war. It has historical precedent in the United States as well, with legislation like the Indochina Migration and Refugee Assistance Act, which welcomed nearly 130,000 South Vietnamese, Laotian, and Cambodian refugees into the United States under a special status following the Vietnam War. In Afghanistan, our country made similar promises to those who had helped us. These are overwhelmingly brave American allies who directly helped our troops. They served as translators, engineers, guides, and even side by side as brothers in arms. It also includes their family members and people who fled in genuine fear for their lives from the Taliban. These are people like Saeed Quatali, who spent years helping our forces as security commander for the Afghan Interior Ministry in Herat province. He was unable to evacuate, so he fled through nearly a dozen other countries, finally reaching the United States in 2023. They received relocation help from a veterans organization, and Quatali got a job as a leasing agent and enrolled his children in a charter school. Then, Quatali got an email that he needed to leave within 7 days. And I quote, "I have a threatening letter," Quatali said. Quote, "If I go back, like 100%, they're going to kill me and my family as well," end quote. Just a few years ago, I was proud to welcome more than 300 Afghan refugees to Connecticut. Refugees and allies who were fortunate enough to have already made the trip left behind their lives, professions, and families with the hope of a better life. So many of them supported our mission abroad, and they came to us in their hour of need. We have a duty to ensure that these men, women, and children have the resources they need to thrive. In terminating this status, the Department of Homeland Security cited, quote, "notable improvements in the security and economic situation, such that requiring the return of Afghan nationals to Afghanistan does not pose a threat to their personal safety due to armed conflict or extraordinary and temporary conditions," end quote. What were those notable improvements? One, a small decrease in armed conflict and attacks against civilians compared with 2022. Second, an increase in Chinese tourists. That's the evidence the Department of Homeland Security gave us that life in Afghanistan is safe. Slightly fewer attacks on civilians and more Chinese tourists. Give me a break. One report about this issue quoted an interpreter who worked with U.S. Army Special Forces from 2011 to 2014. This gentleman, who was lauded by President Trump at the White House in 2019, summed up the impact of ending TPS for Afghans by saying, and I quote, "It's a death penalty for them if they return," end quote. Make no mistake, if these people are sent back to Afghanistan, it is a death sentence. The Taliban will kill them without hesitation. That cannot be this committee's position. It would be a stain on America's name for all history. I urge my colleagues to support this amendment, and I yield back.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentlelady. The gentleman from California is recognized to address the amendment.
I'm going to support the gentleman's amendment. However, I would hope between now and the time we can come to the floor that we can come up with acceptable language that will protect the worthy Afghans that are here in this country, that protected our interests when we were in Afghanistan and did notable service for the United States government. There is no doubt if those people came back to Afghanistan, they would be immediately executed. So we need to come up with some language that would protect them and at the same time make sure those individuals who were not thoroughly vetted and are here for other reasons are removed from the country. With that, I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. The gentleman from Georgia is recognized to address the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise in support of the amendment. The amendment would help ensure that Afghan nationals who assisted our service members in Afghanistan be allowed to live and to work in the United States without fear of being deported to the hands of the Taliban. A few weeks ago, the Trump administration ended temporary protected status for tens of thousands of Afghans, with the Secretary callously determining that the security situation in Afghanistan had improved to the point where its citizens could return home safely. The Taliban is not only an enemy of the United States, it is evil and it frequently commits human rights abuses against its own people. They treat women and girls as property. They have eliminated freedom of speech and religion, and they will persecute any repatriated Afghans who assisted U.S. personnel during the two decades that we were in Afghanistan. Our service members know this issue better than any of us. They fought alongside these Afghans, the Afghans who served as soldiers, navigators, interpreters, intelligence support. And service members often bonded with our Afghan allies because they share our values. American Afghan allies saved American lives on the battlefield at great risk to themselves and to their families. Let me be clear. America's Afghan allies are not safe in today's Afghanistan. Failure to pass this amendment will only expedite the removal of Afghan nationals to a hostile terrorist regime. Those Afghans who helped the United States in our time of need and who had every reason to believe the United States would have their back, would be subject to persecution, to torture, and to death. I urge a yes vote on the amendment to protect those who put their lives on the line for us. And I too hope that between now and the end of this process, that we will be able to work out language that will successfully be able to protect these individuals who did so much to protect us. With that, I yield back and urge the support of the amendment.
Thank the gentleman. Are there others wishing to address the amendment? Seeing none, the gentlelady from Connecticut is recognized for 1 minute to close. Oh, who's amendment? Gentlelady from Minnesota is recognized for 1 minute to close. Thank you.
Thank you for doing the job that you're doing. I know that you and the ranking member through all of these stand up and just do a lot of work for all of us, so totally understand. You know, there was much that the subcommittee chair said about, you know, all the different visas that are out there. I do a lot of visa work in my my constituency. I have a lot of Hmong, Lao, Cambodian, especially Hmong refugees who work side by side with our soldiers. There's language barriers. These visas can take months, they can take years. They came here in, you know, in 2025, they just find out that this is going to end in July. Maybe they started this paperwork, and I'm not kidding, folks. This paperwork can take years. I don't disagree that people have to be vetted. They're now trying to get paperwork for people who they might not have the right name, or it might have been a contractor through the State Department trying to verify their employment and all that. So they're struggling with getting this paperwork done. I appreciate what my chairman of the Defense Appropriations Committee said. So, Mr. Chair, if I could ask the subcommittee chair, Mr. Amati, to yield.
Without objection.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Amati, gentleman from Nevada.
Floor isn't mine, but
Yeah.
yes, I will.
No, I asked you if you would yield, if I could yield you some time.
Yes, ma'am.
I need to know, and you and I are friends, and I don't use that term lightly, as you know. If you're willing to seriously work with me on trying to figure something out. There's been bills in the Senate, there's bills in the House. These people are in limbo, and I think that if we could even get some movement on the administration to know one way or the other whether or not they're serious about doing things. So people could apply for green cards. They could see if they could apply for the special program that you did. Some of these people might want to apply for asylum, but they need some time to do that. So if we can work between now and the Rules Committee to see if we can come up with some joint language to move forward on that, I would withdraw the amendment. But if you don't think that that's possible, and I know, and I know you mean it no disrespect if you think it's not possible, I'll proceed with the amendment. Do you think it's possible we might be able to come up with something before the Rules Committee?
Yes, ma'am. Priority number one for my staff.
Okay, so to the full chair of the committee and to the ranking member, with that, I will withdraw the amendment, and I look forward to working with Mr. Calvert and you, and I yield back.
I thank the gentlelady for withdrawing, and I appreciate the discussion that this amendment provoked. With that, gentlelady from Florida is recognized for the purpose of an amendment.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I have an amendment at the desk, Wasserman Schultz number 1, and I ask unanimous consent to dispense with the reading.
Without objection, the reading of the amendment is dispensed with. The gentlelady is recognized for remarks on her amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I offer this amendment to restore $1 million in funding for the Family Reunification Task Force. This is a modest amount that carries immense legal and moral weight. This task force was created to confront and begin to repair the damage caused by the Trump administration's family separation policy. one of the darkest stains on our recent history. This was not an accident. It was a calculated decision with the objective of inflicting maximum punishment to convey, quote unquote, zero tolerance. That zero tolerance policy tore thousands of children from their parents at the southern border with no system to track them, no plan to reunite them, and no regard for the trauma imposed on these families. When this horrifying news broke, I attempted to conduct an oversight visit at Homestead in South Florida, where we learned that children were being held, and I was denied. And as appropriators, Democrats and Republicans, we worked together to change the law and ensure members' access to detention facilities going forward without an announcement in advance. And when I was admitted in to carry out oversight, along with the ranking member and numerous others, I'll never forget what we saw there. I know many of you witnessed it as well. Many of those children were under the age of 5. Many still have not been reunited with their parents. Some families have now spent more than 6 years apart. This isn't speculation. It's been painstakingly documented in court filings that are truly chilling to read. Federal courts ruled accurately that family separation without any reunification plan violated the constitutional rights of parents and children alike. The Interagency Task Force for the Reunification of Families was established in 2021 to meet the government's obligations under the Ms. L. v. ICE lawsuit. And just this week, a federal court ruled that the Trump administration is in breach of the settlement that resolved that case. We have a legal obligation to bring these families together. And more than that, we have a moral obligation. It is not enough to say, quote, the last administration did this, the last administration did that. America has only one federal government, and it was our government that separated these families. It was our government that agreed to the terms of the settlement. It must be our government that reunites them. And this task force is the only federal entity charged with making that happen. Yet this bill eliminates its funding entirely. This is especially troubling given provisions in the Republican reconciliation bill that would allow unprecedented, indefinite detention of minors. Restoring this $1 million will not come close to addressing the full scope of what these families deserve. It won't undo the trauma. It won't fix the years lost. It's just a portion of what we should be dedicating. But it will keep the work going, identifying families still separated, coordinating reunification across borders, and offering basic services to those harmed by our own policies. This should not be a partisan issue. No child should be used as leverage. No family should be treated as disposable. No matter our differences on border policy or immigration reform enforcement, I'm old enough to remember there was bipartisan outrage at the time over how these families were treated. And there should be bipartisan resolve today to make it right. We owe these families more than apologies. We owe them action. We owe it to them to reunite them. And this amendment is one small but essential step. And I urge adoption of this amendment to restore funds to the Family Reunification Task Force, and I yield back.
I thank the gentlelady. The gentleman from Nevada, the chairman of the subcommittee, is recognized to respond to the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The previous administration spent millions of dollars on the so-called Family Reunification Task Force. Last year, we spent almost $34 million. The settlement agreed to by the previous administration was really a giveaway to non-governmental organizations under the guise of supporting aliens temporarily separated from their families after adult aliens were arrested during the zero-tolerance policies of the first Trump administration. This settlement, agreed to by the previous administration, provides a whole host of taxpayer-funded services over a period of 6 years, including behavioral health, medical services, housing, and legal services. But perhaps most egregiously is this settlement streamlined asylum claims, which allowed certain individuals the ability to apply for parole and jump to the head of the line. I urge my colleagues to defeat this amendment so we can stop the endless funding of programs that do nothing but undermine enforcement efforts and encourage more illegal immigration. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman for his remarks. The gentlelady from Illinois is recognized to address the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise in strong support of this amendment, which carves out $1 million to continue the Family Reunification Task Force that was stood up in 2021 to facilitate the reunification of children with their families who were separated by the government between January 20th, 2017 and January 20th, 2021. In connection with the first Trump administration policy of family separation. In 2023, the government entered a settlement agreement that ended the practice of separating families at the border and provided a single mechanism, which is this task force, to reunite children with their families. It is still not fully known how many children and their parents are covered under the settlement, but estimates suggest nearly 4,500 to 5,000. The last update we received from the Department of Homeland Security about the progress of the task force was in April of 2024, where they reported that as of March 20th, 2024, approximately 3,225 reunifications were completed, with over 1,400 children without confirmed reunifications. 1,400 kids. We cannot turn our backs on these families. We cannot ignore court settlements. We cannot abandon this task force until their mission is complete and every child is reunited with their family. This amendment restores the task force, and I urge my colleagues to support it. And I thank Ms. Wasserman-Schultz for offering the amendment. I yield back.
Thank the gentlelady. Gentlelady from Connecticut, ranking member of the full committee, is recognized to respond to the amendment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I rise in support of this amendment, which provides $1 million for the most basic humanitarian responsibility of this country, ensuring that families are not ripped apart with no hope for reconnection. The family separation agenda that the first Trump administration pursued was one of the most cruel and heartless policies ever enacted by this government. According to the department's own reports, nearly 1,000 and maybe more children have still never been reunited with their parents, never have been reunited with their families. I clearly remember a call I had with Alex Azar, the HHS secretary at the time. I was in my home in New Haven with my 2-year-old grandson on my lap when I asked the secretary if the Trump administration had a list of the children and their families in order that they would be able to reconnect their children at some point. Just a basic list of kids, parents. This is, Rosa DeLauro, Anna, Catherine, Jonathan Greenberg. That's so that we were connected. He assured me that they had such a list. It was a lie. A pilot program conducted in 2017 showed that DHS lacked adequate systems to track separated children for the purpose of reunification. But the Trump administration still expanded the policy in 2018, anticipating that over 26,000 children could be taken from their parents or guardians over just 4 months. This was not an accident. Attorney General Jeff Sessions, in a phone call to the Southwestern DA's office, said, and this is a quote, "We need to take away children," end quote. He felt it was necessary to discourage migration. In a radio interview, he later said, and I quote, "If people don't want to be separated from their children, they should not bring them with them," end quote. This was understood across the first Trump administration. HHS's acting assistant secretary, Stephen Wagner, told reporters, and I quote, "We expect that the new policy will result in a deterrence effect. We certainly hope that parents stop bringing their kids on this dangerous journey and entering the country illegally," end quote. The cruelty of this policy was and is today astounding. Imagine treating children, the most vulnerable among us, with less care than we treat luggage at an airport or clothing dropped off at a cleaner's. We bring our clothes to be dry cleaned. They give us a slip of paper. We go back, we pick it up, we check against the list to see if we have it all. We check our bags at airports. We've got a tag. We reclaim it at baggage claim, and we claim them. We can track packages today all over the world. We know where they are, when they're coming, when they're going to arrive at our doorstep. Family separation should never be a U.S. policy again. Imagine being separated from your child. You think about it, with no way to know where they were being sent or if you would ever be able to find them again. It was and is an appalling abuse of power, but that was a government policy. When I visited the McAllen CBP Processing Center, and I was at Port Isabel, the ICE detention facility, and it was at Port Isabel where we met with the mothers. This was about 8 years ago. We were told that ICE and CBP were working together along with HHS, and that kids would be reunited with their parents. We spoke to mothers there, crying. They didn't know where their kids were. They had no communication with their kids. They were hard-pressed to know what to do and felt helpless in the process. And at the beginning of their stay, Port Isabel was a prison for these mothers. At the beginning, they were not even allowed to make a telephone call to try to get information about their child. There were 2 children in 2018 that were forcibly separated from their parents and brought to the state of Connecticut due to family separation. The trauma these children suffered was indescribable. They were ultimately reunited with their parents, but not before a real rupture of trust between parent and child. Just one story. It was the Trump administration that inflicted this trauma under zero tolerance and should make amends for this intentional cruelty. I fought this cruel policy in both the minority and majority. 2018, I passed an amendment through conference directing no less than $4 million in funding to the National Child Traumatic Stress Network for separated children and families. 2020, when I chaired this committee, I directed funding to post-release services to engage with family reunification service providers for those affected and increased funding for mental health services for their children. Critically, I passed language in full committee that is still in effect today, requiring monthly reports on children separated from their parents at the border, so that doesn't happen again. This amendment provides the bare minimum. We need to do more. This amendment will ensure that some effort is being made to ensure this hateful policy will not be reinstated under the Trump administration. I thank the chair. I urge my colleagues to support this amendment and yield back.
Thank the gentlelady. Chair would advise, and we certainly will proceed with debate. We are voting now. So the debate goes on too long, or we'll just suspend and go on. But I'm not trying to shut the debate down. I just want you to be aware of where we're at in timeline. I'm not sure where we are right now in the vote. We'll try and find that out. In the meantime, gentlelady, Ms. Dean is recognized for her comments on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank the gentlewoman from Florida for raising this amendment and raising this issue that sadly seems so forgotten. More than 1,000 children, years separated from their families, from their parents. It's hard to even wrap your head around. And this amendment takes me back to my travels to Homestead, Florida, under the first Trump administration. I traveled there with a number of representatives, members of Congress, including John Lewis. At Homestead, you might remember, that was a for-profit detention center of children. For-profit. They charged hundreds and hundreds of dollars per day per child. And they showed us a room with all of these TV screens monitoring when the child would turn 18. And I said, what happens when the child turns 18? They are not only let go, they are handcuffed and deported. It was a shameful, cruel place, and it was for profit. In fact, one of the owners of it was a former member of the Trump administration. That was Homestead, Florida. And I'll never forget John Lewis with an interpreter speaking to children at a lunch table and saying, America welcomes you. We are better than this. This is not how we treat the stranger. He was gorgeous and eloquent, and these children didn't know what to make of any of it. Fortunately, that horror of a detention center, for-profit detention center, was eventually closed. But we went on to other borders and visited others who were in detention. And I want to say this, sadly, what we saw, the hallmarks of the first Trump administration, were incompetence, corruption, and cruelty. And guess what? The hallmarks of the second Trump administration are incompetence. If you came back as president and you knew there were 1,000 children that you separated, wouldn't task number one be how do we get those kids back to their families? Wouldn't that be your moral obligation? But they're so incompetent that they can't do it. They're so corrupt that they would run for-profit detention centers of children. And this is the thing I never understood until somebody said it to me recently. And I don't believe it of any members in here. But for this administration, the cruelty is not just an after effect. It is often the point. The cruelty is the point with separating children. The cruelty is the point with so much of what we are seeing. The cruelty is the point with TPS holders. This administration, and I pray that some of you will separate yourself from the incompetence, from the corruption that is so present before our face, and from the cruelty that mars this administration and will forever. And it's hurting our country. With that, I rise in strong support of this very small and modest amendment that will say we're not forgetting those children. I yield back.
Thank you, gentlelady. Are there others wishing to address the amendment? Gentlelady from Texas.
Mr. Chair, I rise in support of this amendment. Family separation, the Trump policy, started in my district, and it went on for months before it was discovered publicly. And I hope we can all remember those horrifying audio tapes of those wailing children who had been taken from their parents. I know there's a lot of folks who will say, well, the parents shouldn't have done that. This is about those kids. This is about those kids. I have met with children who were reunited with their families, and despite their reunification, the trauma is incomprehensible. I want you to think about your kids and how horrific it would be to be separated from your small children. And imagine the fear and the terror that those small children lived through. This very modest amount would go a very long way to making sure that we bring those families together. That's our obligation. That is our obligation. Our government separated them. Our government did not have a policy or a plan in place for tracking them. Our government has an obligation to right this wrong. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. Are there others wishing to address the amendment? Seeing none, the gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute to close.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, the expression there, but for the grace of God, go I, is applicable here. Because I think a lot of people who would consider voting against this amendment think to themselves, well, you know, that's what they get for putting themselves in that situation. And, you know, there's a lot of mothers in this room. And I remember back to walking through that detention facility and going to the border with the gentlelady from Texas and walking through the Mexican side of the border and seeing the babies and toddlers really in squalor, in tents on the ground, waiting for the opportunity to be able to come across and go through the process of seeking asylum. I remember thinking how desperate and trying to wrap my mind around what would happen and how I would feel if my children were ever taken from me while I was trying to trek across the entire continent. And once I arrived, my children were stolen from me, and 6 years later, I still didn't have them back. I mean, that's just incomprehensible. And the cruelty that we're allowing here is incomprehensible. We have an obligation, no matter who is in charge of our administration, to abide by settlements. That's what this ensures we do. Please support this amendment. It appropriates just $1 million to make sure this task force can continue its work, which is our obligation and the administration's obligation by law. Thank you for your indulgence, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. Questions now on the amendment offered by the gentlelady from Florida. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. No. Opinion of the chair, the noes have it. Roll call has been requested. Sufficient support being shown. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Adderholt. Mr. Adderholt, no. Mr. Aguilar. Mr. Alford. Mr. Alford, no. Mr. Amadei. Mr. Amadei, no. Mrs. Bice. Mrs. Bice, no. Mr. Bishop. Mr. Bishop, aye. Mr. Calvert. Mr. Calvert, no. Mr. Carter. Mr. Carter, aye. Mr. Case. Mr. Case, aye. Mr. Siscomani. Mr. Siscomani, no. Mr. Klein. Mr. Klein, no. Mr. Cloud. Mr. Clyburn. Mr. Clyburn, aye. Mr. Clyde. Mr. Clyde, no. Mr. Cole.
No.
Mr. Cole, no. Mr. Cuellar. Ms. Dean. Ms. Dean, aye. Ms. DeLauro. Ms. DeLauro, aye. Mr. Diaz-Balart. Mr. Diaz-Balart, no. Mr. Edwards. Mr. Edwards, no. Mr. Elzey. Mr. Elzey, no. Ms. Escobar. Ms. Escobar, aye. Mr. Espaillat. Mr. Espaillat, aye. Mr. Fleischman. Mr. Fleischman, no. Ms. Frankel. Ms. Frankel, aye. Mr. Franklin. Mr. Franklin, no. Mr. Gonzalez. Mr. Guest. Mr. Guest, no. Mr. Harder. Mr. Harder, aye. Dr. Harris. Dr. Harris, no. Mrs. Henson. Mrs. Henson, no. Mr. Hoyer. Mr. Hoyer, aye. Mr. Ivy. Mr. Ivy, aye. Mr. Joyce. Ms. Captor. Ms. Captor, aye. Mr. LaLota. Mr. LaLota, no. Miss Lee. Miss Lee, aye. Miss Lutlow. Miss Lutlow, no. Mr. Levin. Mr. Levin, aye. Miss Malloy. Miss Malloy, no. Miss McCollum. Miss McCollum, aye. Miss Ming. Miss Ming, aye. Mr. Molinar. Mr. Molinar, no. Mr. Moore. Mr. Moore, no. Mr. Morelli. Mr. Morelli, aye. Mr. Mervan. Mr. Mervan, aye. Mr. Newhouse. Mr. Newhouse, no. Ms. Perez. Ms. Perez, aye. Ms. Pingree. Ms. Pingree, aye. Mr. Pocan. Mr. Pocan, aye. Mr. Quigley. Mr. Quigley, aye. Mr. Rushenthaler. Mr. Rogers. Mr. Rogers, no. Mr. Rutherford? Mr. Rutherford, no. Mr. Simpson? Mr. Strong? Mr. Strong, no. Mrs. Torres? Mrs. Torres, aye. Miss Underwood? Miss Underwood, aye. Mr. Valadeo? Mr. Valadeo, no. Miss Wasserman Schultz? Miss Wasserman Schultz, aye. Mrs. Watson Coleman? Mrs. Watson Coleman, aye. Mr. Womack? Mr. Womack, no. Mr. Zinke? Mr. Zinke, no.
Does any member, does any member wish to record their vote or change their vote? Gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Cuellar votes aye.
Are there any other members wishing to change or record their vote? Seeing none, the clerk will tally. On this vote, the ayes are 28, the noes are 29. The amendment is not agreed to. Votes have been called. We'll take a brief recess, and we will reconvene immediately after the last vote. Committee stands in recess.